Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 161 to 180. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. With that said, Glaynt watched as a young lady got up, wearing a black dress with a lady's hat and a black face mask that covered her nose. She had two small brown briefcases at her side. As the gentleman who requested a custom order here today? She asked with a slightly nervous voice. Custom order? Glaynt thought doubtfully, but he watched as Adrian spoke as he raised his hand. Here I am, tell me, miss, is my order ready? The question was asked in a calm tone, but Glaynt noticed how the lady had straightened her back. This made him raise an eyebrow in doubt under his mask. It seems that the lady is nervous. Did he scare her somehow? Also, what is this personalized request that Mr. Adrian made? Glaynt thought confused when the lady spoke, but her nervousness was more noticeable. Your order was completed successfully and following all your specifications, sir. I am sure you will be satisfied. That's good to hear. So how much would it be? Adrian asked, still calm, but under his mask he had a sharp smile. The lady seemed to feel this and she swallowed hard for a moment before answering. Thanks to you providing the main material, the price has been greatly reduced so that it will be £2,400 in total, sir. Thanks to the fact that he was close to Adrian, Glaynt heard how he clicked his tongue very softly, but then he responded calmly. That seems fine to me. This answer seemed to calm the lady down a lot, who relaxed her shoulders and spoke much more calmly. Inside this briefcase is your order. Don't worry, the briefcase is included with the payment. Would you like me to explain the effects of your order, or do you prefer to read the note inside the briefcase that explains the same thing? Adrian gave a soft laugh as he answered. I'd rather read the note. After all, I wouldn't like any of the party members to know the color of my underwear, don't you think so, miss? He asked sweetly to the miss, who had a forced smile on her face as she answered somewhat tense. I think the same, sir. Mr. Adrian is a bully, thought Glaynt flat-faced as he saw this. Grandpa, why do you make me go through these things? The young lady thought anxiously in her mind. Adrian took many strips of bills from his cloak and placed them on the worker's tray, all under the envious eyes of the party members who watched as the tray was filled with money. These strips were organized into 10 strips with 20 £10 notes each, another 2 strips with 10 £10 notes each, and another 4 strips with 10 £5 notes each. When the money was completed, the worker carried the tray up to the lady, who looked at this with the corners of her mouth trembling. Luckily I brought another briefcase, thought the young lady. The money was delivered to her. She quickly counted all the money to ensure it was complete, and when she verified this, she handed one of her 2 brown briefcases to a worker, who handed the briefcase over to Adrian. Adrian just took the briefcase and opened it a bit and looked at what was inside. Glaynt wanted to know what was inside, but the redhead only opened enough to only let him see what was inside. Glaynt watched with barely contained curiosity as Adrian just nodded, and reaching into his briefcase he pulled out an envelope sealed with a simple metallic yellow seal. The redhead simply broke the seal and took out the letter and began to read. Glaynt saw how Adrian stared at the letter for a long time, but then he put the letter back in the envelope and then put it in his cloak. Then the masked Adrian turned to see him, and seeming to understand what he wanted, he just let out a soft laugh as he answered in a low voice. I can't show you my cards. This made Glaynt frown as he turned his head, ignoring the redhead. He really is a bully, thought Glaynt, annoyed. Glaynt then watched as a man got up from his seat and spoke. I'm looking for Slumber's charms. Does anyone have them? Asked the man, looking around. He was dressed in a simple suit and a mask that came up to his nose. Here I have 5 slumber charms, £3 each. A man said as he got up. He was a thin man and quite young for the voice, dressed in a brown suit and a plain mask that covered his entire face. The first man was silent for a few moments before nodding and speaking. I only need 2 inches. The younger man accepted this and placed the charms on a worker's tray, while the other placed £6 on another tray, and the process was completed. Glaynt wished he could see the charms, but due to the distance he couldn't get a good look at them, but Adrian raised his hand and spoke. I want the remaining 3 slumber charms. Do you have the dream charms too? The young man was surprised for a few moments, but he quickly recovered and responded. Deal, and yes, I have 2 dream charms, £5 each, the price is non-negotiable. The young man spoke with a business tone, and Glaynt watched as Adrian nodded. I accept, answered Adrian calmly. Some workers came and repeated the same process as before. Glaint observed this astonished. These trades had been quite fast. He watched as Adrian grabbed the charms from the worker's tray, and thanks to him being close he could see them. There were in his left hand 3 rectangular pieces of silver and in his right hand 2 semicircular pieces of silver, both seemed to have unrecognizable writings. It looks like Hermes, but I'm not too sure, but it seems that the writings in the semicircular are much more complex, thought Glaint seriously when he saw this. All the nobles were expected to know how to speak various languages including Hermes and ancient Hermes, so Glaint could understand what was written on the silver pieces. The rectangular pieces are the slumber charms and the semicircular pieces are the dream charms. He watched as Adrian looked at the charms for a few moments before tucking them into his cloak. I'll tell you what they are when the party is over, Adrian whispered to Glaint, who nodded excitedly, and under his mask he had a smile. In the end, Mr. Adrian is not as bad as I thought Glaint cheerfully. Now somewhat motivated, he got up from his seat and spoke aloud. I'm looking for the apothecary potion formula. Is there anyone who has it? As he asked that, he began to look around, but after 2 minutes passed without anyone saying anything, Glaint just sit down visibly disappointed. I told you, the redhead said, amused. Turning his head quickly, he looked at Adrian's mask, but he could feel the smile that the man had. This made him clench his fists. But no matter how angry he wasn't going to talk back to Adrian. He was not going to give him that satisfaction. I was wrong, Mr. Adrian is a complete and hopeless bully. Glaint thought as he bit his lip, and a vein throbbed in his neck. Trying to distract his mind from thinking about the extremely annoying redhead, he tried to think about how he was going to get the potion formula from apothecary. That's how the party continued, and Glaint didn't buy anything that was traded, he was only interested in the formula of his potion. So after an hour, when a trade was completed, Mr. Eye of Wisdom rang a bell and got up from his seat and standing in front of the group spoke. The party is over. Now you will proceed to leave the party one by one, wait your turn. When Glaint heard that, he couldn't help but let out a disappointed sigh. He hadn't been able to get his formula. The first to leave was the lady who carried the briefcase filled with money with one arm through one of the 5 exits. 5 minutes passed and the 2 of them were next. They left the party, and with Adrian in the lead, they moved stealthily through the dark streets of Backland. After a while they stopped in an alley where Adrian removed his mask and Glaint did the same. Then, Mr. Adrian, could you explain to me what the dream and slumber charms are? Glaint asked, somewhat excited. He may not have gotten what he wanted at the party, but that didn't mean he would go home empty-handed. Adrian just smiled sweetly at him as he asked in amusement. Sure, but what will you pay for this knowledge? This caused Glaint's face to break. Mr. Adrian, what do you mean by paying for knowledge? Glaint asked through his teeth, his voice full of annoyance, and a vein throbbed in his neck. Adrian smirked as he explained. Don't tell me, Glaint, that you already forgot our deal. In exchange for knowledge, formulas, etc., you would have to pay me with pounds or with help. By bringing you here I already paid for the information you got me. The last thing he said in a darker tone. This scared Glaint a little, who swallowed but was still quite upset. So, giving several sighs, he managed to calm down a bit, and narrowing his eyes at the redhead, he asked. So what do you want, Mr. Adrian? Adrian's smirk grew as he spoke. I'll give you a pretty full explanation, but it's too basic knowledge, so 200 pounds should be enough. If this is the price of basic knowledge, I don't want to know what the price of advanced knowledge will be. Glaint thought curiously as he nodded and took his wallet out of his pocket. I accept the deal, so start explaining, he said as he took out the 200 pounds and handed it to the redhead, who received it with a sweet smile. It will be my pleasure, Glaint. The way the redhead had said that sentence made Glaint narrow his eyes quite a bit, looking at the man suspiciously. Why did he suddenly feel cheated? But before he could say anything, Adrian's smile disappeared and he began to explain in a calm and serious tone. This made Glaint put those thoughts of being deceived aside and began to listen to Adrian very carefully. Before explaining what the slumber charm or the dream charm is, I first have to explain what a charm is. Charms are mystical items that have the power bestowed by a high-level existence such as essence, contained in a container that can handle said power, and stabilized by the powers of the corresponding symbols craved in precious metals. The uniqueness of the container also influences the power of the charm at the end. The power contained within them would diminish over time. Of course, high-grade charms will last much longer than low-grade ones. With the short explanation given, Glaint raised an eyebrow in doubt. Then why buy them if the power in them diminishes over time? Glaint asked doubtfully, and Adrian gave a short laugh as he pulled out one of each charm he had purchased. Although over time they lose their power, their usefulness should not be underestimated. For example, this is the slumber charm and it lasts for 3 months, he said as he raised the rectangular silver piece towards him. The ability of this charm is to force people to sleep. Adrian said, surprising Glaint, who looked at the piece of silver in the redhead's hand in amazement. The charm could not be more than 12 centimeters long and 4 centimeters wide. Something this small has such power, Glaint said in astonishment, causing a sharp smile to form on Adrian's face. Don't underestimate yourself so much, Glaint, Adrian said, and the blonde felt a blow to his pride. It's not that small, thought the wounded Glaint as he stared daggers at Adrian, who chuckled. To activate the charms, the wearer must use specific incantation, it is impossible to use them at will. The slumber charm's incantation is crimson, he said, and Glaint moved far away from Adrian. Seeing this, Adrian raised an eyebrow while having a slight smile. Glaint looked at him with surprise and doubt. The charms will also only be activated if the incantation is said in a language that possesses mystical power, being Elvish, Ancient Hermes, Jotun, or Dragonese. Glaint just had a flat face upon hearing that and simply started to approach the man without saying anything. I want to hit him, I really want to hit him, thought Glaint, looking at Adrian's smiling face that looked quite beatable in his eyes. Adrian smiled knowingly, he knew the look Glaint was giving him, and he bent slightly, extending his face towards the blonde. If you want, I'll give you a chance, you can hit me now and I won't do anything about it, he said as he closed his eyes, surprising Glaint. This guy is crazy. Who would let someone hit them on purpose? The blonde thought in alarm, but he was looking at Adrian's chin. His fist clenched in reflex. Now he could take revenge for all the times the redhead bothered him, as he had provoked him. Now he could charge him for all that. When he started the movement of raising his fist, he stopped. He looked the closed eyes of the man in suspicion. No, this is a bad idea. This guy's body is very hard. If I hit him, the only thing that's going to happen is that my fist is going to break, thought Glaint, who could only lower his fist even though he didn't want to. The memory of how he collided with Adrian earlier was still fresh in his mind, and this was a perfect ointment to his desire to punch the man's face. Adrian opened one eye with a grin showing his teeth. He straightened and extended the semicircular piece towards Glaint. This is the dream charm. Its abilities allow the wielder to enter the dream of someone else, Adrian explained, then tucked the charm back into his cloak. Now I will explain how to know when a party will be organized and how to know the code. Glaint just nodded without saying anything. Now he just wanted to go home to rest. Dealing with the redhead had tired him a lot and he needed to rest before a vein burst from stress. Why did I agree to work with this guy? Glaint thought in defeat. At least the man, despite how much he bullied him, showed that he was worried, in his own way, because he had made him go to a psychiatrist, and thanks to this the nightmares no longer bothered him and he could go to sleep peacefully. At the thought of the psychiatrist, Glaint couldn't help but make an embarrassing smile form on his face. Remembering the beautiful soft orange hair slightly curled at the ends, accompanied by a tender pointed face and beautiful violet eyes, he could only sigh longingly. Miss Jane. All this happened before the gaze of Adrian, who stopped his explanation and looked surprised at Glaint, who seemed to have lost himself in his mind. Adrian sighed as he snapped his fingers in front of the nobleman's face. This was accompanied by a small spark of flame that made Glaint react. You finally came down from the moon. Do you plan to tell me who is the lady that has you like this? Glaint was embarrassed at the question while scratching his head. Excuse me, Mr. Adrian, I was thinking about my psychiatrist and I got lost, he said, embarrassed, but Adrian only narrowed his eyes as he spoke. Oh really? Glaint, not realizing what was happening, nodded. My psychiatrist Miss Jane is a very good person. She has helped me a lot with my nightmares, and whenever I talk to her I feel calm and relaxed. When he said all this, Adrian's narrowed eyes softened as he sighed. So it was that. She must be very good at what she does, he said calmly, and Glaint nodded. She is the best in the hospital, Mr. Adrian. When Glaint said this, he saw how Adrian nodded. Okay, that's enough this time. Pay attention to me and then you can think about your girlfriend all night with your hands. Glaint just nodded, not understanding what Adrian was referring to, and this time he did pay attention to what the redhead said about how the party would appear in the advertising section, and in the same part it would say the code. With that done, Glaint just nodded and spoke gratefully. Thank you for bringing me here, Mr. Adrian. I'll try to find the apothecary potion formula on my own, but remember to contact me if you find it. It's all about our business, Glaint. Would you like me to walk you home? It's quite late for someone like you to be out at night. Adrian's tone was soft but had a hint of provocation that Glaint noticed but couldn't understand what did the redhead mean, so he just let it slide. Seeing that it was already night and that they were still in a somewhat bad area, Glaint only sighed as he nodded. If you could accompany me to the entrance of Empress Burrow, I would be very grateful, Mr. Adrian. Adrian gave a soft laugh as he walked forward. It will be my pleasure, Glaint. With that said, the corners of Glaint's mouth trembled and he just followed the redhead in silence, both of them moving through the dark streets of Backland. The crimson moon was halfway to the highest point in the dark cloudy sky. In a room coming out of the shadows was the figure of Adrian, who had in his hand a small brown briefcase. Finally home, thought the redhead as he sighed. He wasn't that tired, but after moving to Backland Bridge and then escorting Glaint to the entrance of Empress Burrow and then returning home exhausted him quite a bit. Taking off the burnt band and putting it in his pocket, he banged the briefcase on his living room table and sat down on the sofa. That done, he took out the envelope and taking out the letter, he read it again. Thank you for hiring our services. I must say that it is quite rare to be able to work with the material you brought me, and this motivated me to make your product as good as possible. I'm sure you'll be satisfied. The artifact doesn't have a name yet, so you are free to name it. The artifact's abilities are as follows. Summoning holy light can be activated by providing the artifact with 2 seconds of spirituality, allowing it to summon a beam of holy light that descends from the sky to purify the undead and deal some damage to other targets. Holy water creation can be activated by a continuous supply of spirituality for 5 seconds, along with using the word sun in ancient Hermes, which would create a small amount of solar holy water, which would exorcise evil spirits and it would drive away the cold and purify wraiths. The fire of light can be activated through a simple thought. It is a holy and concentrated flame that will suddenly appear out of nowhere. Cleave of purification is an effective attack against wraiths, and can also be used to augment bullets if desired. Immunity to horror allows you to no longer feel fear. The holy oath is used to temporarily strengthen strength, agility, fire damage, and holy damage by chanting the corresponding ancient Hermes term. The negative effect is the following. The artifact hates rain, so if you find yourself in the rain, the power of the artifact will be quite reduced up to a maximum of 56%. You will also get tired faster. This is solved by hiding from the rain, and after 30 minutes without the rain touching you, the artifact will recover its power and you will not get tired so quickly. Again, Mr. Unknown, I must say that I had a good time making this artifact. If you have another characteristics that you like to make into an artifact, just give it to my granddaughter at the party and I'll take care of the rest. The craftsman. The lunatic even signed. Isn't he afraid that I will do something to his granddaughter? How confident are you? Have you already gone senile? Thought Adrian, confused, not expecting the letter to have so many personal details. At least he did a good job. These abilities were just what I needed, and the negative effect couldn't be better. Just staying away from the rain should be easy. Adrian said with a smile as he lowered the letter. Looking at the briefcase on his desk, Adrian just grabbed it and opened it and took out the artifact from it. Ads by PubFuture. In his right hand was a medium-sized medal. It was in the shape of a 6-pointed sun. This sun was separated into 2 sections, inner and outer. The inner one seems to be made of a dark gold that had the sun drawn during sunset, while the outer one seemed to be made of a dark orange metal that simulated the sky at sunset. He could feel it giving off a little heat. Touching the metal lightly, he could feel the heat coming from the center, and Adrian smiled sharply. I can use this as a necklace and wear it under my clothes, very well hidden and without attracting attention, the redhead thought with satisfaction as he looked at the medal. But then he frowned a little and lowered the medal to the table and stared at the beautiful drawing of the sun in the sunset that was in the middle. The ability to not feel fear is good, but maybe at some point it will become a problem. Fear helps human beings to control their behavior and decisions. You take that out of the equation and you have a daring human who is not able to measure the danger. Though it can also help me avoid hesitating when taking a very risky action. With those thoughts, Adrian just sighed as he grabbed the medal and headed to his bathroom. I'll just have to be careful in my actions and I'll be fine. With those words, he entered his bathroom and went to the toilet and sit on it. He reached into a pocket of his modified leather jacket and pulled out a thin coiled rope. Cutting off a long enough piece using his hunting knife, he threaded the thin rope through the metal ring. Then he tied the rope and the metal became a necklace. A small flame ignited at the tips of his thumb and index finger. He then burned the part where he tied the rope, sealing it, ensuring it would not come loose. The flames died down and Adrian held up the metal turned into a necklace. The cord was a dark brown color, so it gave the necklace a nice touch. With that done, Adrian nodded and placing the necklace on top of the sink, he took out of his jacket some red candles, red poppies and a piece of paper with a symbol drawn on it. Inside the city of calamities on the outskirts of it was Adrian standing in front of a door of flames. Closing the flame door, Adrian looked at the necklace in his hands with a small smile. "Should we test what you can do, little one?" the redhead said excitedly as he put on the necklace. He sent spirituality to the metal for 2 seconds and a holy light descended and hit the place in front of him. This made Adrian smile dangerously. "This hits a decent area, so I don't have to worry too much about missing." After verifying that, the continuous spirituality sent for 5 seconds to the metal on his neck. "Son," said Adrian in ancient Hermes, and he saw how water appeared and wet everything around him. "That was less epic than I thought, but maybe if it hits a spirit it will look better," Adrian criticized, then thought and saw how a golden fire appeared in front of him in the air and shot forward until it hit the ground. Adrian saw this somewhat astonished because he felt something that he was not expecting. He repeated the same process and the golden fire appeared again in front of him, but this time Adrian extended his hand to this fire. In a few moments this simple golden fire that floated peacefully in the air turned into ravens of golden fire that began to fly around Adrian, who looked at this in amazement. He moved his arm and the crows all moved to one side, he moved his arm to the other and the crows did the same. Finally he closed his fist and the crows turned into balls of golden fire that began to float around Adrian, who watched this with a stunned smile. "Although the metal is the one who creates the golden fire, it does this using my spirituality, creating a connection, and I can control the golden fire as if I had created it," Adrian said with a huge smile. "This means that I can use all my moves but with a fire that can damage evil spirits and specters and wraiths. Although it consumes more spirituality to control the golden fire," Adrian murmured, astonished. He had also felt something inside him when he controlled the golden fire. His pyromaniac potion had reacted when he controlled the golden fire, and this has surprised him. This move had confirmed one of the main rules for acting as a pyromaniac. You are a master of fire, so you must master it. Even if it is a different fire, you must master it. Adrian muttered, feeling how the potion inside him reacted, making him smile sharply. With this, Adrian had already found 3 rules of acting to act as a pyromaniac. 1. You are an agent of destruction. Your fire will consume everything, leaving ashes in its path. Burn your enemies with your fire until only ashes remain. 2. You are a just agent. Fire consumes, but only to the extent that you allow it to do so. You control the fire and you control the destruction it causes. 3. You are a master of fire, so you must master it. Even if it is a different fire, you must master it. The acting rules have been discovered now, I just have to act guided by them. Hunter's potion is not far from being completely digested, but Pyromaniac's is still a long way off, but now with the acting rules that should be solved. When the situation in East Borough calms down, I'll go pay a visit to a gang and Hunter will be digested. I can also take the opportunity to act as a pyromaniac, thought Adrian, who already had in mind some gangs to visit. No one in the East Borough would care if a gang member disappeared, being the only thing he left behind a pile of ashes. Looking at the balls of golden fire floating around him, Adrian still had a small smile on his face. He finally snapped his fingers and the fireballs disappeared and he sighed. With all done, he extended his hand towards the floating flame and it expanded again to form a gate of fire. Removing the necklace, Adrian raised it to his eyes as he spoke with a soft voice and small smile. It was a lot of fun using you, but our game time is over, so now you better go home. With that said, he threw the necklace towards the door and it flew through the air until it crossed it and landed in front of his body. Having seen the whole process, the redhead put a hand to his chin while raising an eyebrow. Good throw, nice curve in the air, good distance. Personally it deserves a 9.5 and it's just not a 10 because it's not a stained glass window of a church of the Lord of the Storm. Adrian seriously criticized, but when mentioning the window his tone became mischievous and provocative. But when the Church of Pigeons came to mind he couldn't help but associate it with a fallen friend. This made his smile fall a bit, this made him sigh and extending his hand to where he kept his things, the yellowish smoke dispersed revealing everything he brought here. There were several pairs of clothes ranging from jackets and pants, various materials, there was also a red-stained handkerchief, a letter, and a strange glove on one side. The letter floated to him, and grasping it with his left hand he opened it and read it again. Sunday, July 22nd, the redhead murmured, his tone calm, not revealing his emotions. This was the letter that Charles had sent him regarding Victor's funeral, which is to be held at the Holy Wind Cathedral. He was planning to attend, first out of respect for his fallen friend and second because this might be the last time he sees the trio. He no longer planned to attend the club again, so this would be a goodbye to all of Charles and Isaac. Releasing the letter, he let it fly back to his pile of things. Before he covered the pile with yellowish smoke again, he turned his gaze to the glove. Ads by PubFuture. Quote. He didn't say anything and just extended his hand to the glove, and it flew up to his hand and he observed it in detail. It was a short glove of a beautiful burgundy color similar to that of wine. It had various details made of red and white threads that seemed to draw various and different simple masks, some smiling and others crying, similar to those one associates with the theater. Now there were more crying masks than smiling masks, and Adrian watched this with slightly narrowed eyes. This little guy looks like he wants to receive praise. Adrian thought seriously as he looked at the glove. I'll deal with you another little day now, I'm not in the mood, the redhead said to the glove, causing some of the smiling masks to change to crying ones. At this, Adrian only let out a chuckle and squeezed the glove tightly in his hand, causing the few masks that were smiling to start crying. He just dropped the glove and let it go back into his pile, and he covered it again in yellowish smoke. He looked at this with cold eyes and simply formed the sphere of light and left the city of calamities, returning to his body in the bathroom. Opening his red eyes and looking around, he just let out a short sigh as he raised a hand to his face. That glove must be conscious in some way, that's why it likes to be applauded and praised, that's annoying but also makes room for an interesting experiment. Adrian thought with a sharp smile as he took out the burnt band from his pocket and looked at it. When Klein visited Foggy Town after failing to steal the Antigonus family notebook, he had the powerful Creeping Hunger artifact, a glove that allowed him to use the Beyander abilities of stored souls. Long story short, after a fight involving mushrooms, Fish and Mr. A, Creeping Hunger, mutated because of this fight. The negative effect of this artifact after being sealed was that each time it was used, one had to feed it with a living person. After the mutation, the glove wanted a person alive every day and praised the true creator from time to time. This was something Klein would not tolerate, so he found a way to negotiate with the glove before he could seal it again. Klein found a very curious way to negotiate with the glove. It turns out that thanks to the fight in Foggy Town, the glove had acquired a severe mycophobia, which is the fear of mushrooms. The glove was so terrified of mushrooms that it refused to work if it was within 5 meters of one. So Klein used this phobia, and with special mushrooms he managed to negotiate with the glove. Creeping Hunger was a sentient artifact, and if the wizard glove Adrian had was similar, then he could do the same. The burnt band was an artifact that had been born from the death of a monster that was formed due to the ravings of the true creator. The negative effect of this artifact was that as long as one wore it, one would hear soft ravings from the true creator, and the more one wore it, the louder it would become. So Adrian planned to use the burnt band to negotiate with his glove. He wasn't sure if it would work, but there was no harm in trying. Well, yes, there is someone who is going to get hurt, but that's the glove. I don't care what a glove feels like. If it thinks I'll spend 10 minutes applauding and praising it every 3 hours, you're crazy. I'd better break you and give the characteristics to the craftsman and make me something new that will work, thought Adrian, who now had a sharp smile. That was the main reason why he hadn't taken out or reused the glove after the fight with Nathan and Sasha's harassers. The negative effect was simply too annoying, and he refused to do all that for a glove whose only ability that was useful to him was substitute paper figurine. With this plan made, Adrian, still with that smile, grabbed the necklace that was on the ground and raised it to his eyes. His smile had relaxed and was now a small one as he touched the metal. Why couldn't you be like this one here? Thought Adrian, somewhat disappointed. But he pushed those feelings aside and looked at the necklace in his hands with a curious expression. But what should I call you? The redhead murmured as he raised his free hand to his chin. He looked carefully at the metal and several ideas came to his head, but one prevailed thanks to the color and appearance of the necklace. With a calm expression, Adrian slipped on the necklace and tucked it behind his shirt. It will be Talk Millennium. The the redhead murmured as he left the bathroom and went to his room. He would wear the name of the Yu-Gi-Oh main character's necklace. Yugi wore a necklace known as the Millennium Necklace or the Millennium Talk. The reason he chose that name was because the metal seemed to be part of some set in that universe, so he decided that would be a good name. Entering his room and sitting on his bed, Adrian just lay down and covered himself with his blanket. The only thing that illuminated his house was the crimson light that came from the moon, so he settled better in his bed. Adrian slept. Opening his eyes, Adrian found himself in the midst of a world that had been turned upside down and twisted. The redhead found himself on a barren plain with picked black stones at his feet and not even a piece of grass. In the center of the plain stood a black steeple with a huge silver snake coiled around it. Adrian's eyebrow trembled strongly and he looked at all this with his eyes shining with extreme annoyance. Annoying snake. Finding himself back in this world that was upside down and twisted, the annoyance was clear on Adrian's face. But this only lasted a few moments as he only sighed as he walked towards the black steeple with a huge silver snake coiled around it. "It's about time you contacted me," muttered the redhead, who barely took 2 steps and was already in front of the rotten wooden door. Before entering, Adrian turned to look at the huge silver snake that was sleeping on one side and he seemed to think about something for a few moments. Not seeing the damage, he just extended his hand towards the snake and touched its silvery body. The sensation was cold and he could feel it touch the dense patterns and symbols that covered its entire body. "I can feel its scales, but it seems as if they weren't there, as if they were illusory," thought curiously Adrian, looking at the snake that was still peacefully asleep. It seemed that it didn't feel his touch or didn't care. Having enough of this, Adrian gently patted the snake a few more times before walking through the rotten wooden door. Seeing the same scene as the last time, with the stairs going up and down in a spiral, the corridors, shelves and rooms were either normal, inverted or some embedded in parts of others, he only began to advance through walls and doors until he reached the same but at the same time different place than last time. He was no longer in the previous darkness but in what seemed to be a child's room. In a corner there was a bed big enough for a child with blue sheets, with a window to the outside showing the barren plain and a simple wooden desk with a wooden chair. Looking at the floor, he saw how he had several toys scattered around it, from numbered squares of different colors ranging from 1 to 9, a small black teddy bear and various papers with drawings on them. He bent down and grabbed one of the papers, but instead of having a drawing it had a short sentence. August 14th at 3:27 p.m. in the port of Backland, wait for someone. Adrian read this sentence with a flat face, then reread it several times and even turned the paper over, but there was nothing written on the back. Reading the sentence again, he just looked around the room, but again no sign of Will. This caused him to let out a slightly dark chuckle as he spoke in a sweet and soft voice. It was the voice that a mother used to tell her son that she was not going to hit him, but she always lied and ended up doing it anyway. "You bring me here in the middle of the night, you make me walk here, and you just show me this note. Don't you have manners? Tell me, didn't your parents teach you that it's rude to disturb someone when they're sleeping?" When he said that, nothing happened around him, but he managed to hear the amused laugh of a child in the distance. At that moment the dream where he was broken. Opening his eyes and looking around, Adrian found himself back in his room, but there was no longer a crimson light coming through the window, but now it was white. Looking up he saw that it was already morning, and as always the sky was cloudy covering the sun. "At least you made me wake up in the morning, maybe I won't spank you the next time I see you," the redhead muttered with a calm tone as he reached for his nightstand, and grabbing hangover time he opened it and saw that it marked 7. Now being at his table eating a breakfast that consisted of scrambled eggs and a cup of black coffee, the redhead was taking a sip but his mind was elsewhere. August 14th at 3:27 p.m. in the port of Backland, wait for someone. "What kind of mission is this?" Adrian said, annoyed as he put down his cup of coffee. Will had revealed almost no information about what he had to do, and this bothered him a lot. No description of the person's physical appearance, how he would be dressed, or most importantly, what he had to do. Letting out a small sigh to calm himself, Adrian began to think with a colder mind. If he didn't tell me what that someone would be like, it's because that someone would be the one to find me, but that doesn't tell me what my mission is about. He tried to think about what it could be, but nothing came to mind, which made him sigh again. "I just have to wait to see with what this naughty snake surprises me with," the redhead murmured as he took a bit of egg to his mouth. As he ate, Adrian put aside the snake's antics and decided to think of something else. I have 700 pounds left. I hope the hunt for Joseph is resolved soon so I can borrow some money from the gangs. Victor's funeral is tomorrow at the Holy Wind Cathedral. There are demigods there, so entering with any artifact is suicide. But it doesn't mean that I can't hide them elsewhere, and when the funeral is over I'm going to pick them up. Maybe on the roof of a house quite far away. Leaving them in an alley is very dangerous, so it's best to be in a high place. The redhead thought seriously as he ate. As far as he knew, the Holy Wind Cathedral had at least one demigod, Ace Snaker as he was known in the Beyander world, Spellsinger of God. Adrian, knowing his luck, he would not bring any artifacts to the funeral, so he was already planning where to hide them. Already having a rooftop in mind, Adrian put his fork down on his empty plate and reaching for his coffee cup he took a sip. The next tarot club is in 2 days. Since my Monday is already free, I don't have to worry about being in an awkward situation when I'm summoned. In this meeting Audrey will obtain the spectator potion formula, and for the next one she will already be one. Alger should also advance to sequence 7 in the next one, and Klein should already be a Beyander. Thinking about this, Adrian noticed a problem that made him frown slightly. Klein will have a much greater spiritual burden because he will have to bear the spiritual drain of keeping 2 sequence 7s being sequence 9. Wouldn't this make the son unable to join as in the original? Adrian thought worriedly. The son, or Derek Berg, was too important for him not to join the tarot club properly, and this worried Adrian immensely. Trying to calm down, Adrian tried to remember what the process for Derek to join had been like. If I remember correctly, Derek joined after Klein digested the seer's potion, plus he was still a normal human, so his load should be light. When Derek became a Beyander, it didn't take long for Klein to advance to sequence 8, so he should be fine. Maybe the problem is that the meetings will be short, but as long as Derek joins everything is fine, thought the redhead, somewhat uneasy. Seer. Klein will test his spiritual vision at this tarot club. Adrian thought in alarm as he turned pale. He had no idea what could happen if Klein looked at him. Would Mr. Fool explode in front of the still innocent Audrey and the overthinker Alger? Or would he lose control and turn into a monster and attack them? Shit, I don't even want to imagine what could happen if Klein looks at Hunter's Hallows. Adrian thought in alarm as he raised his hands to his head. Now my only hope is that his intuition causes him to unconsciously ignore me like when he didn't look at Megos. Adrian was quite worried and alarmed, so to calm down he closed his eyes and began to draw the spheres of light on his head, slowly entering cogitation. Slowly his mind calmed, his breathing slowed and his worried expression relaxed. He slowly opened his eyes and let out a soft sigh. Klein, I hope your intuition keeps your mask from falling off, Adrian said as he got up from his chair and carried the dirty dishes to the kitchen to clean them. He had originally planned to have a chat with the mage glove today afternoon, but decided to leave it for another day. Right now he didn't need the glove ability, plus he already carried a lot of artifacts. He wasn't immune to their negative effects, so he had to be careful not to bite off more than he could chew. Sherwood Borough was located near the Tussock River. It has many small companies and several residential buildings. It was also in this borough that the headquarters of the Church of the Lord of Storms at Backland were located. Although it was better known as the cathedral was huge, and when you see it, the first thing you would relate to it would be the sea. It was painted in diverse and beautiful blues that combined. It seemed that the cathedral was hit by the waves. If one entered inside it, the idea would only get stronger. The salty smell of the sea was everywhere inside it. They could also feel the sea breeze. The walls were covered with stained glass windows. They had thunder, storms and raging seas. There were multiple rows of benches leading up to a tall podium which was painted a blue-gray, similar to the color the sea turned when a horrible storm raged. Now the rows of benches were full of people, but there was a bit of a strange layout. There were men, women and children. The number of men was greater than that of women. If there was a woman in any row, she always went to the left of her husband. If the woman was single, she was in a single row for them. All these people looked tired, some with dark circles under their eyes and others were even crying. These people were grieving. Despite the emotional pain that these people were going through, they were attentively observing the podium in front of them, on which there was a person standing. Atop this podium was a silver-eyed old man. He wore a soft hat, dressed in a black robe with the symbol of the Storm Lord embroidered on it. He had in his hands a thick Bible with a blue cover, and it had the same symbol of the Lord of Storms. In one of the rows towards the end was a red-haired man who watched this old man trying his best to avoid showing his discomfort. This is the aura of a demigod. Adrian thought as he took soft breaths to calm himself. The old man was Ace Snake, who was praying for the believers who died at the party. Ace's voice was strong and there was a power behind it that made people subconsciously lower their heads. One would think that it was because the voice reached so deep into the hurting hearts of the people that they could only lower their heads to start praying. Even Adrian also lowered his head but didn't start praying, he just kept his mouth and eyes closed. Even his voice makes me have no choice but to lower my head, and he's not even trying. The power of demigods is ridiculous. The redhead thought in astonishment. The suppression that a demigod could exert on a normal person was enormous. Even mid-sequence beyonders would have no choice but to lower their heads when in front of one. Adrian's supersensitive nose detected that the smell of seawater had grown stronger just as the sea breeze had grown stronger. He even couldn't help but be moved by Ace's words, and slowly he began to see a beautiful shore with a blue sea in his mind. In this celestial sea, a beautiful ship was floating on. It was a beautiful ship made of the noblest of noble woods. It had 3 tall masts that seemed to resist any storm. The sails were a beautiful light blue that perfectly reflected the color of the sea. A large number of people were standing on it who were working together to make the ship work. Adrian was standing on the shore, and around him were all the people who were in the church and were looking at the boat crying loudly. He managed to recognize several people in the ship, several of those who attended the party and had died. He could even see the punishers who had fallen, and they were the ones giving the orders. He saw someone working on the sails of the ship wearing a sailor's uniform just like the rest. That was Victor, and he had a big smile as he did his part. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian saw this with a soft smile, but suddenly the captain of the punishers began to sing. The waves on the shore swell. The wind shakes the canvas and murmurs in the white waves. I hear your savage saying. It calls me away. The ship beckons, rocking impatiently, on a long way. There it stretches in the desolate distance. You can't come with me, you see, my boy. How easily my stars sink. How easily the wind turns into a storm. Then death threatens in 1,000 ways. How did I challenge him, if I knew you were in trouble? Or untie the noose from your arms, and also separate your heart from me? Do I know if I can do it? And victorious return home? The wave that sings so seductively now. Maybe it's the same one that's devouring me. It's still in your hands. You have not entered into anything unsolvable yet. Or quickly part your young life of my uncertain being. Oh, I want, before you have to. Giving up is easier than losing. Oh, let me drive in consciousness that I am alone on earth. So bow down to the monster. Before the unheard of, not my mind. I play with terror, and suddenly I could be at my destination. 'Cause high up on my masts, your photo will always be inspiring. And, scorched by lightning. Ads by PubFuture. Increase courage with its brilliance. The howling winds, no matter how eager, don't drown out the sound of your voice. And if only I could see and hear you, then there is no problem with me. I don't want to do without life. And I want to fight with death. How would a world become a burden to me? Embrace angels as beautiful as you. You won't break my image either. Inaugurated with tears of friendship. It will be in days of pain and joy. Be your comfort and confidant. Yes, stay, even if everything is gone. My friend in paradise home. And then throw the wrong wave. I died back to the beach of flowers. I know better than that. Another, a faithful hand. That does not reject contempt or pain. To bury my remains. Victor sang his heart out, as did everyone on the ship. Suddenly, several women dressed as sailors came out of the ship's cabin while holding trays full of wooden glasses with foamy beer filled to the brim. They did so while dancing and singing, sharing the beers with the men on the ship. These women were some of those who had died at the party. The lady Victor was flirting with at the party approached him while singing, and in her hands she had a wooden cup full of foamy beer which she handed over to the man who received it with a smile. Taking a big sip, he wrapped an arm around the woman's waist, who giggled. Victor sighed, satisfied with a foam mustache, and kissed the lady. Separating from the woman, she now also had a foam mustache which caused them both to laugh. At the end of the song, the sails were high and the wind began to blow. Slowly the boat moved away from the shore, and all those who were on the boat looked out and began to say goodbye, waving their arms while laughing loudly. Adrian watched this with a soft smile, and his eyes were slightly teary. At least in this vision you had a happy ending, thought Adrian sadly as he extended his arm and waved it goodbye to his friend, who laughed loudly, still with his arm around the lady's waist. "Take care, Victor," Adrian yelled at the boat that was getting further and further away. Victor just raised his wooden cup towards him with a smile. Slowly the ship moved away on the horizon until he lost sight of it and the vision faded until he found himself back inside the cathedral. Tears fell freely from his red eyes. Taking a hand to his face to wipe away the tears, he could hear the loud sobs and cries of people crying for their loved ones who would no longer return. The believers in the Lord of Storms will embark on a journey across the ocean to the divine kingdom of our Lord. The journey will be one without pain and sadness, where there will only be celebration and joy because the Lord will receive them with open arms, Ace said as he closed the blue-covered Bible. "May the storm be with you," he said as he punched his left chest with his right fist. "May the storm be with you," shouted all the believers who hit their left chest hard. "May the storm be with you," Adrian repeated as he also punched his left chest with his right fist. When Ace finished the prayer and saw that everyone had made the prayer posture, he just nodded. Just at that moment, multiple men wearing blue garments with the symbol of the Lord of Storms on the back came out of both aisles that were on the sides of the podium. All of them were carrying beautiful funerary urns. They were a beautiful navy blue and had several waves drawn all over their bodies. "The souls of our loved ones are already on their way to the kingdom of the Lord, but their bodies were left behind. The body is not worthy of entering the kingdom of the Lord because it is dirty, and now those bodies have turned to ashes, and you will be in charge of taking these ashes to the sea, where they will be scattered and join the sea, which is the domain of the Lord," he explained in a loud voice, and the people only nodded as they received the urns of their loved ones. Adrian watched as the people who received the urns were leaving the cathedral, but then he turned his gaze to the side. He saw how a man was receiving an urn with a tired and sad expression. The one who handed him the urn just gave him a hateful look he barely hid and quickly left. This was a somewhat pale man with brown hair and gray eyes wearing a black suit. He had on circular glasses and he could see that he had dark circles in his eyes. Embracing his right arm was a blonde woman dressed in a black dress and with a bulging belly showing her pregnancy. The woman also had a tired and sad face. Standing behind them was a couple, a man and a woman. The man was already showing signs of his age. His black hair had several white parts, his blue eyes were tired and he also had dark circles under them. He was also wearing a black suit. The woman had her black hair well combed, not letting any of it fall on her white forehead. She was a woman around 40 years old, but she kept her beauty quite well. She was also wearing a black dress. Sighing, Adrian took a quick look around and seeing that there weren't many people around, he approached this group from the side. "It's been a while, Charles, Isaac," the redhead said with a small smile. His voice made the four of them turn to look at him. Some looks were scared, another uncomfortable, and another of slight surprise and relief. "Adryan," the man with glasses said with extreme relief as he quickly walked towards the redhead and gave him a big hug, being careful not to move the urn too much. The hug surprised Adrian for a few moments, but he just returned the hug with a soft smile. He thought that Charles would be somewhat afraid of him after seeing what he saw. That's why when he arrived at the cathedral and saw the four of them, he avoided being seen by them to avoid making them uncomfortable. For a hunter, avoiding being seen is as easy as breathing, and he is sequence 7, if he wanted, the four would never have known he was here. But instead of doing that, he decided that when it was all over it would be a good time to greet them, because if they were uncomfortable they would only have to put up with him for a few moments. But that wasn't the case. Charles even hugged him as soon as he saw him, and this made him feel more relaxed. "It's a relief to see you're okay, Charles," Adrian said as he patted his trembling friend on the back, and then he looked at the three people ahead. Charles's wife, when she saw that the redhead was looking at her, she just gave him a small smile as she nodded gently. Adrian returned the nod as he shifted his gaze to the older couple. "It's good to see that you're okay too, Isaac," the redhead said, and Isaac just gave him an awkward smile as his wife hid behind him. "It's good to see you too, Adrian," the man said with some discomfort, and this made the redhead let out an internal sigh. Before he could say anything, Charles pulled away from him and his gray eyes had tears falling from them. "Adrian, I'm really sorry for what happened at the police station. I was scared and told what happened. I beg you to forgive me," asked Charles, to which the redhead only gave a small laugh. "All is forgiven, Charles. I know how the interrogators are there. It's good that you spoke before they took stronger measures," he said as he gently patted Charles on the shoulder, who only nodded. Looking around him and seeing that the cathedral was more empty than before, he turned his gaze to the group. We should talk somewhere else before they kick our asses out, Adrian said calmly, ignoring the looks he was receiving. Dot dot dot. Dot dot dot. As they walked through Sherwood Borough, you could feel the discomfort in the air, but this came mainly from Isaac and his wife. Adrian was in the front talking to Charles and his wife, while Isaac and his wife were further back looking at this uncomfortably. Charles, are Victor's ashes in that urn? At Adrian's question, Charles, who had the urn in his hands, nodded sadly while sighing. Ads by PubFuture. They are his ashes, I will take care of throwing them into the sea. The Church of the Lord of Storms has the custom of doing this with their dead. Normally it would be a bishop who is in charge of praying for the dead, but Mr. Dutch paid a lot of money to the church so that Archbishop Ace Snake is in charge to do it. He did the same so that one of the 13 archbishops of the Church of the Evernight Goddess would pray for the dead, and Archbishop Anthony Stevenson was in charge of praying for them. Charles explained, to which Adrian only nodded while raising an eyebrow. Why would you be the one in charge of throwing away the ashes? Asked the redhead, to which Charles sighed as he spoke with clear sadness in his voice. I have to leave Backland and go back to Lindbergh. This made him raise his eyebrows in surprise and he spoke in confusion. What do you mean by going back to Lindbergh? Besides, what is it that you have to leave Backland? Charles just looked around and seeing that the street was somewhat crowded, he returned his gaze to Adrian. It is better that I explain this in a place with less people. I know a cafe around here that separates the tables with booths. This answer made Isaac quite uncomfortable, who stepped forward and grabbed the gray-eyed man's shoulder. Charles, are you sure about this? Now you don't have your permission. Isaac spoke in a low voice and Charles only separated the blue-eyed man's hand from his shoulder as he responded with a serious expression. It's all right, Isaac, this is my last day in Backland. If the police find out, it will be when I have already left this city. Charles's wife, whom Adrian now knew to be called Luna, looked at this with a solemn expression. It was obvious that she had already discussed this with her husband and agreed with this. All she did during that talk was go to the side of the Isaac's wife, who was shaking from being alone. Whereas Isaac's wife, whose name was Lisa, always stayed away from Adrian, and when she looked at the redhead it was with clear fear in her brown eyes. When Luna got to her, Lisa hid behind her and always kept her eyes on the ground. Luna looked at this with a sad look in her eyes but didn't say anything. She just extended her right hand to the woman, who took it and squeezed hard. This seemed to calm the black-haired girl a lot, but she refused to look up. Adrian used the corner of his eye to see this interaction but didn't care about it. It was obvious that Lisa was terrified of him and he didn't blame her. He understood why that was, since after all he killed a person in front of them. On top of that, it was one that it was possible that she knew. The fact that Charles and his wife, who saw the same thing but had no other reaction, was incredible. As that scene played out behind them, Charles and Isaac's argument seemed to finally end and the older man reluctantly returned to his wife. Luna returned to her husband and stood by his side. Let's go to the cafe and I'll tell you what happened, said Charles as he adjusted his glasses. The cafe was better known as, it was a pretty good one in Sherwood Borough. One of the things that those who visited this cafe liked the most, apart from the good prices, was the fact that it offered privacy and at the same time attracted more people to try its curious style. The tables were separated by booths that worked very well as sound insulators. Thanks to this, one could have conversations without having to worry about being heard by others. Now in one of those cabinets there was a group of 5 at a circular table. Isaac and Lisa were on the other side, keeping a good distance from Adrian, while Charles and Luna were closer. Each had ordered a cup of coffee or tea with sandwiches to eat while they talked. Taking a sip of his coffee, Adrian looked at Charles, who was looking at his cup of coffee deep in thought. And are you going to tell me why so much mystery? Asked the redhead, making Charles sigh, and changing his gaze from his cup to the red eyes of Adrian he spoke. First of all, Adrian, first I want you to know that neither Luna nor I are native to Backland or the Lowen Kingdom. We came here 7 years ago because of my job. We are originally from Lindbergh, explained Charles, and Adrian listened to everything before nodding. I understand that, but that doesn't explain why you have to leave Backland. When Charles heard that, he couldn't help but lower his head in disappointment. Luna held her husband's hand as she patted him on the back. To explain that, I'll start with my work and the reason why we come here. I was the professor at the best university in all of Lindbergh. The University of Wisdom is a university that was founded more than 500 years ago, and since it was founded, very important inventors, philosophers, doctors, scientists, etc. have emerged. As the name indicates, it was founded thanks to the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom by the hand of one of its greatest archbishops in its entire history, Debulg Haiseng. I'm straying, but to help improve the relationship between the two kingdoms, it was decided that each would send all kinds of professionals to the other. I was one of those chosen to go teach at the University of Backland. When he explained that, he stopped and looked seriously at Adrian. You do know that belief in the God of knowledge and wisdom in the Loan realm is forbidden, right? Well, I always thought you had balls to say it so openly, Adrian thought, looking into Charles's gray eyes. Charles didn't let Adrian answer, and he just continued. It's the same case in Lindbergh. Belief in the Lord of Storms and the Evernight Goddess is prohibited. None of those who were going to be sent were willing to hide their belief, myself included, so the kingdoms had to find a way to fix this. In the end, the Loan Kingdom proposed the idea to create something that would allow one to say without fear of arrest the god they believed in as long as they are in permitted places. Lemberg accepted this and were born. And 3 years ago we could create a permitted place if the owner and a large number of members accepted. Ads by PubFuture. The club is one of them, for example, thanks to Isaac and Victor being able to convince the other members, but only if I never prayed in front of them nor the club, which seemed fair to me. But in this last year, things that seemed to be on the way to a historic agreement between the two nations changed, that were losing their validity, and the relationship between Lindbergh and the Loan Kingdom became tense. Until about 2 days ago, all the professionals that Lindbergh sent received a visit from the forces of the Loan Kingdom. As he explained, Charles's tone turned darker and Luna lowered her head sadly. They gave us a maximum of 3 days to leave the kingdom, and if we did not leave in the time they gave us, we would be imprisoned without the possibility of release. After this, they lost all their validity, and if we were found saying that we believed in the God of knowledge and wisdom, we would be directly imprisoned. When he said that, Charles turned to look at Adrian as he continued. That's why we will be the ones in charge of throwing Victor's ashes into the sea, because we have to escape from Backland as soon as possible, he said while looking at Victor's urn that was on a chair next to him. Adrian listened to all this and he was greatly surprised and even a little stunned. Alliance between Lindbergh and the Loan Kingdom. The fact of the problem between the God of Knowledge and Wisdom and the Lord of Storms already makes this impossible. The mere fact that they created a card that allowed you to say that you believed in one of the gods is ridiculous. On top of that, they cancelled it when everything seemed to be going well. Why create it in the first place if you are going to cut it just 7 years in the future? This defies all rational thinking of a normal person. Why would the Loan Kingdom even offer the idea of something like this? At that last thought, Adrian's face turned solemn. Charles was at first confused as to why Adrian had been silent for so long, but then he was surprised to see the sudden change in his expression. Adrian, are you all right? Charles asked, somewhat worried as he put his hand on the redhead's shoulder, who gave him a small smile. I'm fine, it's just that I remembered something extremely annoying, he said calmly, and Charles just nodded, withdrawing his hand. The atmosphere had become uncomfortable, and to change that, the redhead decided to change the subject. So are you leaving today, Charles? At the question, the grizzly-eyed man only nodded sadly. In a few hours, it was a miracle that we could wait to attend Robert's funeral, but we can't delay it any longer. When he said that, he turned to look at Adrian while giving him a smile. First I thought I'd apologize to you when you came to the club, but you never came back. Victor's funeral was my last hope, and when I didn't see you, I thought I would have to add this to my long list of regrets. But you did attend, and I was able to thank you for what you did for me, but no words will be enough. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian maintained his smile as he nodded. You are my good friend, Charles, and I take care of my friends. Listening to the last thing, Charles was quite surprised, then the gray-eyed man nodded with a smile. You are also my good friend, Adrian. If you come to visit Lindbergh and need help, you can find me at the University of Wisdom. I will do my best to help you. When he said that, Charles took out a pocket watch from his suit, and opening it and looking at the time, he just sighed sadly. Gentlemen, this is goodbye. While saying that, he got up from his seat like Luna. In his left hand was Victor's urn. Turning to look at Isaac, who returned the look, Charles nodded. Thank you very much for everything you did for me, Isaac. I will never forget you. It was my pleasure, Charles. Take care, old friend. That done, Charles only bowed slightly, and with Luna they both left the cabin, leaving Adrian, Isaac and Lisa alone. Adrian just had a soft smile, not even showing his teeth, but this was enough to make Lisa tremble in her seat. Sorry, I have to go to the bathroom. Lisa couldn't take it anymore and ran out of the cabin, leaving the men alone. Isaac, you've been looking at me a lot today, is there something you want to tell me? Adrian asked, and Isaac unconsciously straightened his back. Adrian, regarding the club eye. Actually, that was something I wanted to talk to you about, Isaac, Adrian cut in, making Isaac flinch. I know that my presence now bothers you, so I won't go to the club again. This is also my goodbye to you, said the redhead as he got up from his seat, leaving Isaac in shock. Before leaving the booth, Adrian turned to Isaac and gave him a soft smile. Thanks for everything, Isaac, have a good day. With that said, the redhead left the cabin. Isaac, seeing that he was alone, sighed as he raised his hands to his head. Suddenly a waiter entered the booth and approached Isaac. Sir, here is the bill. Isaac just froze. As the redhead headed out of the cafe, he felt a look on his back. Turning his head, he saw how Lisa was watching him as she poked her head around the corner. This made a smile form on Adrian's face, who just waved his hand at her. Seeing that she had been found out, Lisa hid again in terror, causing Adrian to chuckle. It's fun to bully people, the man thought with a smirk as he left the cafe. Already further from the cafe and on the way home, the sideways smile he wore shrank until his face became solemn. There was only one thing on Adrian's mind. Black Emperor. If he tried to reason why the Lowen Kingdom would try to form a better relationship with Lemberg only to break it later, only one reason came to mind. And that was the ritual of ascension to Sequence 0, Black Emperor. The royal family of the Lowen Kingdom, the Augustus family, had the wish for King George III to ascend the throne of divinity and become a true god. For that they prepared throughout what Adrian supposed would be at least 15 years to carry out all the necessary steps to complete the ritual. But to do that they first had to release him from the 3 major contracts that made him and any other king unable to advance from Sequence 5. These contracts were accepted by the 7 Orthodox churches and the kings of the world had to accept it. To free him they used the help of the organization whose name must not be said, and managed to get George III released from these contracts. With that problem solved, now came the ritual of Sequence 0, Black Emperor, that consists of own your own country, linking your name to the title of emperor and making it common knowledge among the population. Establish a set of strict and complicated rules that defy the norm, including architectural styles. Encourage your citizens to secretly establish 9 pyramid-style mausoleums. Enter one of the mausoleums. And finally, drink the potion of Sequence 0 while the vast majority of the citizens are scattered throughout different cities in the corresponding sacrificial rituals. Some of these steps were either almost complete or just needed a touch-up. On the subject of mausoleums, in Klein's story it was said that George III found the 9 hidden mausoleums left behind by the Blood Emperor. In order to secretly get the citizens to build these for the emperor as part of the ritual, George collaborated with the organization whose name must not be said, the demonist sect in the Aurora Order, using human trafficking, colonial slaves that were taken from the southern continent, and the kidnapping of the people in the East Borough. In Klein's story it was also mentioned that he made several reforms during his reign, but it was never mentioned what they were. This must have been one of them, thought the redhead as he entered an alley. Using the pipes he climbed to the roof of one of the buildings, walking with a calm step to a brown bag that was tied to a chimney. This was the bag where he had hidden his artifacts, weapons and a change of clothes. The funeral for the party victims at the Holy Wind Cathedral started at 6 p.m. and ended at 8 p.m., so now the sky was dark and the crimson moon was slowly rising. Ads by PubFuture. Grabbing the bag he slung it over his shoulder and climbed down from the roof into the alley, taking off the suit he was wearing. He now was only in his underwear, and carefully folding the suit he put it in the bag and took out hunting pants and put them on. Same with his boots, blue shirt, and his modified leather jacket. As he placed the hidden blade on his left forearm, Adrian returned to the subject of Augustus. This move of his shows that he may have been already Sequence 1 when he proposed the idea, and he didn't cared much that the deities discovered his plan, the redhead thought seriously as he adjusted the black bracelet on his forearm. George III wouldn't have lost much if he was found out. The redhead believed that even if he had been found out, his promotion plan wouldn't have changed much. He assumed that it was something that was hidden, because it was never mentioned in the newspaper. When this card gained more power, it was very likely that it was discovered by the churches and they order it to be taken out. Apparently George III didn't want to reveal his cards yet, so he let that happen. After all, this also entered in the Black Emperor ritual, so he ended up winning. He is the top lawyer, Diverting the attention of the churches was as easy as blinking for him. George III would just have to use the excuse that this was to improve relations with Limburg and the churches would fall for it. Maybe this will be in the newspaper in a few days. Adrian muttered as he put the burnt band in his pocket. The 7 Orthodox deities wanted to have a sequence 0, Black Emperor, but they were not unanimous in their candidate. When they found out that George III was planning to ascend to that throne, it was too late, so they could only give their tacit agreement. When they discovered what George III was doing was when he was finishing the last preparations to advance. And he would have achieved it. He would have ascended to that throne made of the bones and stained with the blood of his own citizens and children that he did not hesitate to sacrifice to achieve his goal. But there was a man who refused this outcome, a daughter who wouldn't let the chance of her father's revival be destroyed, and a heartbroken lover who did everything possible to get George III's plan destroyed. George III ended up dying for this. Klein, fuck you up, Adrian thought as he pulled a necklace out of the bag. Wrapping the talk millennium around his neck and concealing it under his shirt, Adrian grabbed Hangover Time and stuffed it into a pocket of his jacket. Pulling a metal bottle from the bag, he opened it and took a long sip. Feeling the sweet taste of the wine, he just sighed as he slung the bag over his shoulder and continued on his way home through the alleyways. Ads by PubFuture. As he moved through the alleys, the redhead ran into several homeless people who were looking for food in the garbage. Sherwood Borough isn't known for homelessness, but that doesn't mean there aren't any, Adrian thought as he looked at this without saying anything and simply strode past, ignoring the stares he received from the bums. If any of them tried anything, he was just going to knock them out. But seeing all these people made him unable to help but remember one of the main reasons why Klein destroyed George III in the first place. The great smog of Backland, the redhead thought darkly as the crimson light illuminated a part of the alley. Over 60,000 people perished because of this. This was caused by Miss Despair to complete a large-scale ritual and perhaps digest her potion, but was stopped by 0 to 17 being erased and trapped in Foggy Town. And no more died just because of the timely reaction of the Church of the Lord of the Storm. Considering that one of the areas where the cloud hit the most was the East Borough, it was a miracle that only 60,000 people died, Adrian thought. I know when it's going to happen, I even know where the attack will start, but I'm still not going to warn the churches, Adrian thought coldly. What's the use of warning them in time about the Great Smog? That is not going to change anything, but it may even make it worse. This is the hand of the organization whose name must not be told, and the course of history. If I try to change it, the only thing that awaits me is death. Now my life is more important. Adrian's red eyes turned cold. The life and death of all those people had nothing to do with him. He still felt empathy for all of them, but that didn't mean he was going to risk changing their fate. But just because they had nothing to do with him, it didn't mean he would abandon them. He would just give them a chance and nothing more. I'll try to warn the rest of the Tarot Club slowly. Of all, Audrey has the best chance of warning the churches without risk of being swallowed by the course of history, Adrian thought calculatingly. Audrey was the better choice after all. She was the one who warned her father, Earl Hall, who warned the churches, and the Great Smog was stopped. Already thinking about how to reveal the information slowly, Adrian continued on his way home, being accompanied only by the crimson moon. Being already in his street, the redhead stopped a little away from his house with a very cold and serious expression. Unexpected visitor, huh? Adrian thought as the scent of a familiar person reached his sensitive nose. Moving slowly and hiding in the shadows, he slowly approached his house, and the familiar scent he had smelled before grew stronger. The scent came from his house. Adrian was moving through the shadows, circling slowly around his house looking for any difference. The windows are still as I left them, the doors don't seem to have been forced, but I can't rule out the possibility that that bitch used lockpicks to get in, the redhead thought seriously as he finished the 5th lap around his house. Squatting on the edge of his house, the redhead breathed deeply and the smell of his surroundings reached his nose. Quickly he separated the different scents with which he already knew and only found the scent of a woman. Narrowing his eyes, Adrian looked at his house suspiciously, his senses wide open. This is the smell of that prisoner from when I first met Nathan and Sasha. Did she risk coming for me by herself? As quickly as that possibility passed through his head, he denied it with a deeper frown. When she just found out that her partner had died, she didn't hesitate to escape. This shows that she has some brain cells. She wouldn't risk coming for me by herself. there must be someone else that I haven't detected yet, but why make such a risky move after so much time? So important was what was written in that document that I gave to Marich. With several chances, Adrian crept to an angle where he could see his kitchen window. Thanks to his improved eyesight, he was able to see the wires of some of his traps that he had set up in all the time he was in that house. From the looks of it, none of the traps in the main entrance, the kitchen and the living room were activated, so she had to enter either through the bathroom or through the study. Some of the traps I placed there were made with the blood of the demon fish, so if she activated any, then she should already be dead. But that's not the case. The blood of that shitty fish has a horrible smell, so I would detect if one of those traps was activated, and none were, the redhead thought, slightly impressed. That prisoner shows that she's not stupid and has some idea of what she's up against, but for her to have avoided all the traps was ridiculous in Adrian's opinion, and this caused his guard to be raised multiple times. This increased the probability several times that she was not alone and whoever is accompanying her is someone capable. The redhead didn't think that someone who couldn't be more than Sequence 9 would be able to avoid all the traps made by a Sequence 7 hunter. With the possibility that she was not alone, Adrian slowly walked away from his house until 2 houses away he hid behind a dumpster in an alleyway and began to pass spirituality towards a tattoo on his left arm. This tattoo was in the shape of a small bird. It only took a few seconds and the tattoo shimmered in golden dust until a small bird appeared on Adrian's arm and looked at him with its reddish-orange eyes. "Fly and stand on top of my house, I need to make sure some bitch is alone," Adrian whispered, and the bird gave a military salute with its wing and flew away. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian watched that with a small smile on his face. That was actually pretty cute. Shaking his head gently, the redhead closed his eyes and began to draw the sphere of light in his mind. It only took a few moments and he was already in front of the city of calamities. The yellowish smoke reached a little below his knees. Adrian wasted no time looking at the magnificent city, but instead sent spirituality into the golden dust that wrapped his left forearm. In that, the golden dust vibrated for a few seconds until it spread and formed a screen. He could see the bird that was already on the roof of his house. Knowing that his spirituality was important now, he used his right hand to make the image zoom out, and he could now see his entire house, which was as far as he could zoom out for now. Using his hand, he began to turn and zoom in on the camera, checking all the rooms he could. Zooming in on the window of his study, he saw that it was empty and there was nothing different from how he had left it. He wasted no more time in this room but instead zoomed out and turned the camera until he could see his bathroom window. Zooming in again, he didn't find anything different, everything was the same, which made him frown. Finally, he went to the window of his room and zooming in, he looked around it. "There you are, bitch," Adrian said, victorious, although he also frowned when he saw the state of his room. His bed was turned over, his wardrobe was smashed, several of his clothes were scattered on the floor, and his mirror was smashed and several big and small fragments covered the floor. Behind the door of his room, hidden in the shadows preventing the moonlight from touching her, was a young woman with malicious bulk eyes, and her black hair was tied in a high ponytail. She was dressed in black pants and shirt. In her hands was a revolver that she was pointing at the door all the time without taking her eyes off it. Adrian looked at this woman for a few seconds before looking around the room with the camera, and no matter how he looked and searched, he couldn't find a trace of anyone else. "Is she really alone?" the redhead murmured suspiciously as he looked at the woman. Not underestimating the woman, Adrian used the tip of his index finger to touch his left palm twice quickly. His spiritual vision activated and he saw how the woman had a light blue aura that transmitted cold and desire. Suddenly the red zone appeared, this time around the woman's knees, causing Adrian to nod. Looking around, he couldn't find anything unusual, which made him frown even more. Did the person who helped her get into my house just leave her alone when they couldn't find what they wanted and ordered her to kill me? Adrian thought as he looked at the image. Sensing his spirituality, he could only cut the connection, but before doing that he ordered the bird to return to him. But he still did not leave the city of calamities, but instead used his index finger and quickly double-tapped his left palm, shutting off his spiritual vision. Taking a hand to his chin, the redhead began to think about all the information he had obtained. She seems to be alone, but I can't trust that. I have to think that she has another helper hiding elsewhere waiting to surprise me from behind. I can just leave without attacking them and they'd look like idiots, but that doesn't mean they'll stop, maybe they'll try to follow me. Now I have the first hand, They don't know that I know they're there, so they don't expect them to be the ones ambushed, so if I play my cards right I can get rid of them today. If anything goes wrong I have several escape routes ready, muttered the redhead who with a plan already in mind left the City of Calamities. Opening his eyes in the alley he looked down and saw his spy bird standing in front of him looking at him with its reddish-orange eyes. Good job little one, Adrian whispered as he extended his hand towards the bird which made a military salute with its wing and turned into golden dust. This dust flew up to his left arm and the bird tattoo reformed. Getting up from where he was sitting, Adrian put the burned band on his left arm then began to climb the pipes in the wall until he reached the ceiling. Once on the roof, he put his left hand into his jacket and took out a throwing knife and putting his free hand in another pocket, he grabbed hangover time. Ready, he began to run along the roof with silent steps, his speed increased until he became almost a blur for a normal person. Reaching the edge of the house, he took a great leap towards his bedroom window. Flying through the air, his figure made a shadow thanks to the moonlight in his room and this caught the attention of the woman who looked at the shadow in astonishment. Looking up she saw the redhead come through the window, she changed her target from the door to the redhead but before she could fire Adrian threw the knife into her hand sending the revolver flying. Before she could react to losing the revolver, the redhead was already in front of her and he delivered a powerful kick to her stomach. She flew to the door and due to the force of the kick she broke it and flew another 7 meters until she fell in the middle of the hall while throwing up her lunch and some blood. Adrian would have continued with his attack but in one of the smaller fragments of the mirror on the floor the figure of a man appeared. He wore a black tuxedo, a dark red cape, oiled hair, a pair of dark green eyes, and the pale face of a man in his 40s. Suddenly the figure of this man was reflected in the eyes of Adrian who wasn't able to react. Adrian suddenly found himself losing control of his body and this caused him to be greatly surprised. Wraith possession. Steve is here, he thought in shock. Adrian watched as his hands went to his own neck causing him to curse in his mind. Fuck shit, I have to get free before Steve makes me decapitate myself, but how? I can't control my body. An idea flashed in his head that made Adrian curse internally. He couldn't control his body but he could control his mind and thoughts. That was all he needed. That and his fire-resistant body. Just as his own hands wrapped around his neck and his nails dug into his flesh drawing blood, a golden flame appeared in front of him and it quickly covered his entire body, melting his clothes a bit and slowly burning his skin. But this worked and he regained control of his body. Suddenly floating in front of him appeared the floating figure of Steve who was also covered in golden flames and was looking at him with hatred and surprise. You're crazy, are you trying to kill yourself? The man yelled at him and Adrian let out a loud laugh as the golden flames that engulfed him separated from his body and shot towards Steve with speed. Why don't you wash that dirty hair of yours, you greasy bitch? Steve just grunted while using a blink towards one of the windows of the room, dodging the attack of the redhead who didn't care about this but took advantage of the few seconds he bought and launched a fire spear towards the woman who was still stunned in the corridor. He couldn't allow two of them to attack him at the same time. Escaping from a wraith was already very difficult and if he had to face another Beander, regardless of whether it was sequence 9, it would be much more difficult. Originally I didn't want to use my fire attacks in my house but in this situation I can't worry about that shit. Adrian thought as the spear reached for the woman. The woman looked at the spear in alarm and she barely managed to roll avoiding being impaled but she couldn't dodge the blast of the spear that hit her and she could only use her arms to cover herself. The redhead wasted no more time in observing what happened to the woman because Steve reappeared floating in front of him and opened his mouth. From this escaped a sharp shriek that made Adrian's vision blur and he staggered in a daze from Steve's attack who again tried to use his possession on Adrian who despite being stunned the golden flame reappeared around his body functioning as an armor causing Steve to have to stop his attempt to possess the redhead. Taking advantage of Steve's withdrawal, the redhead used a shadow leap and appeared in his living room still somewhat dazed and he had to hold onto the sofa to stay upright. My fucking soul, thought the redhead grunting in pain as he had blood dripping from all the orifices of his face. The wraith shriek directly hit the spiritual body of everyone who heard it and Adrian's spiritual body was in a very delicate state. The only reason that shriek didn't knock him out was because he had built up a resistance to these kinds of attacks thanks to always listening to the true creator's rap. Ads by PubFuture. He couldn't rest for another second because the hairs on the back of his neck stood up and he rolled to the side, barely managing to avoid several nearly invisible ice spears that pierced and smashed his sofa. The golden flame reappeared and it separated into multiple ravens of golden flames that flew towards Steve, who looked at this seriously but with an arrogant smile. He used a mirror blink again and used the reflection of his ice spears and reappeared next to the redhead, who had in his left hand a spear of golden flames that shone with holiness, and he threw it at Steve, who looked at this in shock. Despite being in shock, he managed to move his torso to the side, managing to dodge this attack, but suddenly the spear twisted unnaturally in the air and hit him directly in the chest, piercing him. Then the spear exploded. Adrian barely managed to do a shadow leap, managing to dodge the explosion of golden flames. He couldn't even rejoice about landing a good hit on the man because he reflexively moved his torso to the side, barely making an almost invisible ice spear miss his heart. But he couldn't dodge it completely. Instead, it pierced his right shoulder and embedded him in the wall, causing him to grunt in pain. That hurt. Steve growled under his breath as he emerged from the smoke. His tuxedo and red shirt were shredded. He had a hole in his chest and several serious burns all over his body, showing the burned muscle underneath, but it was healing quickly and traces of golden flames remaining on his body were extinguished. Adrian watched this with slightly narrowed eyes as he grunted. In his right hand was hangover time. He had used the pocket watch ability to distort the direction of his spear so that it would hit Steve. But wraiths have tremendous resilience and will not die immediately, even if they lose their head. This was the second best sequence 5 under the demigods due to his multiple abilities. The only reason Adrian, who is sequence 7, was enduring so much was because of his extreme knowledge in this sequence. He knew all the abilities in this sequence so he could prepare to react in time and defend against them, but that was the end of his advantage. Steve was stronger in every way, and Adrian could only hurt him by using Talk Millennium's ability to create golden flames that could damage wraiths, but this consumed a lot of spirit and Adrian would end up running out of spirituality before doing any serious damage to Steve. The only option as before was to escape, but Steve wasn't giving him a chance. He had to do a big number to find an opportunity. Slightly shifting his gaze to his kitchen, he just grunted as he sent spirituality towards the burnt band and used a shadow leap, disappearing from his spot and reappearing next to the kitchen entrance with a hand over the hole in his shoulder. Sorry mate, but our game has to end. I have things to do, so what do you say we call this a draw? The redhead said provocatively, and Steve just snorted in response. At that, Adrian let out a fake sigh of disappointment as he shook his head, never taking his eyes off Steve. Too bad, Adrian told him disappointedly as golden flames appeared around him. Ads by PubFuture. These turned into swords pointing at Steve, who looked at this with a smirk, and Adrian responded with one. Enjoy the fireworks, the redhead said arrogantly as the golden flame swords suddenly changed direction and flew towards the kitchen at high speed. The objectives. The gas pipes. Adrian just gave Steve the middle finger as he turned the hangover time crown to the right. Shadows engulfed him and he disappeared from his spot, and Steve tried to follow, but instead he stayed where he was standing like an idiot. Was the last thing he said, confused before the swords hit the gas pipes and a strong explosion engulfed Steve and the entire house, destroying it. About 100 meters away, Steve calmly came out of a window while looking at the house where he had been a moment ago. The house was completely destroyed, the front had collapsed and is burning. He observed this coldly. Suddenly he saw a person running out of a part of the ruined house who was covered in fire while screaming. You're still alive, Steve said, somewhat surprised, while using a wraith blink and leaving the window in front of the body. He looked at it in surprise. The body was female, but it was completely burned. Her hair was burned, her skin looked like raw meat due to the burns, but she was still alive. At this, Steve just nodded, still surprised, as he grabbed the woman's arm, who let out another cry of pain. If you managed to survive that, it shows that you are blessed. While saying that, he hung the woman over his shoulder and began to walk away from the scene. Several people were already leaning out of the windows of their houses and watched in fear as the man walked with a burned body over his shoulder. While that happened, Adrian used several shadow leaps as he took out some bandages from his jacket that was slightly melted and put it around his right shoulder to control the bleeding. Reaching a manhole cover, he opened it and jumped in, closing it. Running quickly through the dark, smelly, dirty sewers was the figure of Adrian. Darkness was no problem for him with his night vision. His red hair fluttered from the speed with which he moved. His senses were more open than ever, attentive to any possible change that could happen. From his eyes, ears, nose and mouth there were traces of dried blood. His face was also slightly burned. the same burned as when one went out into the sun on the beach without sunscreen. That was stupid. Why the fuck I didn't think a wraith was hiding in the shards of glass. Adrian thought, annoyed with himself as he hurried to a corner. Slightly bending his knees, he lowered his center of gravity and made a sharp turn without losing much speed. The sewers are the safest place because there are no reflective surfaces here, so Steve won't be able to use Wraith Blink to surprise me. But despite knowing that, the redhead did not let his guard down in the slightest. Steve may not be able to move using the reflective objects, but that doesn't mean he couldn't go through any wall to get to him. What the fuck was Steve doing there? Just for some shitty documents? What the fuck did they have written on them? Adrian thought furiously, but suddenly frowned and put a hand to his right shoulder that he had bandaged earlier. His shoulder was cold. Knowing what that could mean, Adrian cursed under his breath as he stopped. Taking off his leather jacket that was somewhat melted and tearing up his shirt, he looked at his shoulder. It had a hole in it. He could see that no blood was coming out, but the edges of it were slightly frozen by an almost transparent ice, and it was slowly spreading through it. He didn't startle at this sight but just grunted as he knelt next to his jacket and pulled out a first aid kit. Holding the kit in his left hand, he sat down on the dirty floor of the sewer. Placing the kit on his lap, he used his left hand and removed Talk Millennium and placed the metal against his wound. Passing spirituality to the metal, Adrian counted 5 seconds and then opened his mouth. Son, he whispered in ancient Hermes in a low voice, and a decent amount of sun-holy water formed and fell on his wound. Fuck, that hurts, the redhead growled as he used his left hand and spread the water on his wound. When the water came into contact with the ice, it melted, releasing white smoke, and the wound began to bleed. After cleaning the wound, he wasted no time, but opening the kit, he took out the needle and thread, which were already ready. He began to stitch the wound while occasionally frowning. Sewing the back was the most annoying, but he was able to sew up his wound, closing the hole in his shoulder. Ads by PubFuture. He grabbed a small jar from the kit and opening it, the smell of herbs reached his nose. Inside the jar was an ointment made from herbs that he had collected. The hunter's potion had not only given him the knowledge on making traps but also gave him the knowledge of which plants and how to use them to treat various injuries. He placed the ointment on 2 gauze pads, and placing them on both ends of the wound, he grabbed some new bandages and bandaged his shoulder. With that done, he moved his right arm slightly, and the only thing he felt was a slight discomfort which made him sigh in relief. The spear hadn't hit anything important. Wasting no more time, he grabbed his jacket and put it back on. He ran again to get away from where he was as fast as he could. And in all that, he put Talk Millennium back around his neck. After running at top speed for a long time, Adrian noticed a problem that caused him to stop. He had already removed the burnt band from his left arm a while back because the true creator's rap was getting too loud for him. I'm lost, the redhead muttered in surprise as he looked around. He was supposed to find another sewer entrance after all the turns he'd made, but he hadn't found anything. Remembering a certain negative effect, Adrian just sighed in defeat as he took Hangover Time out of his pocket and looked at it. My sense of direction is distorted, he said as he looked at the beautiful pocket watch. The negative effect of Hangover Time is that every time it is used, it will distort something completely random on the user. Whether it's sexuality, tastes, or in Adrian's case, his sense of direction. While looking at the pocket watch, Adrian felt his back wet, which made his eyes widen in surprise. Touching his neck and forehead, he also felt them wet. This made an awkward smile form on his face as an annoying possibility appeared in his mind. Opening the pocket watch and seeing that its hands marked 11, Adrian couldn't help but sigh in defeat. I used it twice and the negative effect stacks with the previous one, so my sense of time is also distorted. The fight with Steve and that woman had happened around 8 p.m. and it had been short. He had been running for 3 hours straight. Ads by PubFuture. If in all that time he hadn't received any surprise attack, it meant that Steve lost him or that he didn't follow him, which made the redhead sigh somewhat relieved. Looking around, he just sighed again in defeat and sat where he was. 3 hours have passed, so there are another 3 hours until the negative effect wears off, he said calmly. I'd better sit down and wait for the negative effects to wear off before I get even more lost in the sewers, the redhead muttered as he looked at the walls of the aforementioned ones. Thanks to Klein's story, he knows that the creation of the sewers and the toilet is thanks to Russell. When he transmigrated to Russell around the year 1143, they did not exist and people dumped their waste on the streets just like people in the Middle Ages. Russell, being someone from the modern world, didn't tolerate this, so he invented the toilet and sewers to fix that. In this way several health problems were solved. Although the sewers took a little longer to reach the Lowen Kingdom, they did eventually arrive. Thank you, Russell, for that. I can't imagine what it would be like to live around so much shit, Adrian thought, somewhat disgusted, but then he let out a laugh full of irony. I'm saying I'd hate to live around such crap, but here I am sitting in a filthy sewer, he said as he shook his head. Although the smell here is not as bad as in the East Borough. Looking around and being tired of sitting, he just got up while brushing off his pants. Maybe it's better to try to find a way out. After all, my sense of time is distorted, so it might only be a few minutes in my perception, Adrian said, but suddenly he felt a gaze on him so quickly, forming a fire spear. He aimed it at where the gaze was coming from. A rat was looking at him from the bottom of the sewer where he had come from. This rat had black fur and red eyes. It was standing on its two legs. This made him sigh, annoyed. The fire spear vanished and the sewer returned to its darkness. It was just you little shit, he said, annoyed, to the rat that only looked at him with its small eyes that seemed indignant and annoyed. I don't have time for this, the redhead thought, annoyed, as he turned around and began to walk with the intention of trying to find a way out. Suddenly, when he took the fifth step, his walk stopped and he had a lost expression as he raised a hand to his head. What was I going to do? The redhead said, confused, while next to his feet was the rat from before, looking at him with what seemed to be amusement and arrogance. Suddenly, a strange worm came out of the body of this rat, and when this worm completely came out of the rat, it fell dead. This strange worm had about 8 circles on its body like rings. The transparent rings had many three-dimensional patterns as if time were swirling through them. This worm climbed up Adrian's boot, and when it reached the redhead's calf, it entered his body like a ghost without leaving any wound. All this happened without Adrian noticing. The redhead was still confused and just shook his head as he sat down on the ground again. I better sit a while longer, he mumbled, tired, as he rested his back against the wall and fell asleep. Adrian hadn't realized it, but him falling asleep like that was not normal. What hunter would fall asleep just like that? He wasn't so tired that he fell asleep as soon as he leaned against the wall. He was able to go several days without sleeping and eating, so falling asleep just like that was ridiculous. He wouldn't have fallen asleep when danger was still lurking. He should have noticed all these abnormalities, and he did. But someone made sure that he forgot them as fast as they appeared. Or rather, someone stole those thoughts the moment they appeared. And the cause of all this was that strange worm. That was close. A few more weeks and I would have forgotten who I am. That stupid girl is too slow. The worm thought with relief and annoyance as it moved inside Adrian. Luckily, this idiot appeared. The best thing is that he has a strong body and full of years of life, just what I needed. The worm thought, even more relieved as it slowly entered a space inside Adrian's body. When the worm fully entered this space, the worm took the form of a beautiful young woman. This young woman had woolly white hair that flowed to her lower back, her eyelashes were delicate, and her gray eyes were mischievous. She wore fine clothes. She observed the space around her with doubt and curiosity while her delicate finger with nails painted a beautiful purple played with her woolly white hair. This guy's spiritual body is very strange, the woman muttered curiously. The space she was in now was Adrian's spirit body. This space seemed like a space full of unimaginable things of various colors, but it also seemed broken, as if something had struck and pulled this place with great force. There was also a yellowish smoke all over it that made it difficult to see. Just how I felt it. This guy is full of life, and not only that, he's also sequence 7 at this age, she said with surprise and pride, seeing the abundance of colors floating in space. According to the teachings left by her family's ancestor and from the knowledge brought to her by the potion, she knew that the number of different colors represented the amount of life one had. The more colors one had, the more life it would have, and the less one had, the less life it would have. But then she frowned doubtfully as she looked around her. There were countless number of cracks that seemed to have been united with a black liquid, so many that they looked like cobwebs throughout this space. The spiritual body of a normal person would be a gray space with various colors and gray mist, but this guy has something similar to smoke. And also, what are these cracks? The woman murmured, even more curious as she slowly extended her hand towards one of the cracks. But just before touching it, she withdrew her hand while shaking her head. I can't waste time. I better take this guy's life and get out of here. Maybe with the years of this guy's life I can return to try to find the family treasure, the lady said with conviction as she walked away from the crack and moved through the yellowish smoke. Don't worry, idiot, I'll make sure to use them well, the woman said, amused. After walking for a while, she stopped at a point that she felt was the right one. Slightly extending both arms, she opened her hands and spheres of light formed in her palms that slowly began to attract the various colors that this space had. At the moment those spheres of light appeared, the unimaginable things of various colors that were floating in space trembled for a few moments until they began to float up to them. The woman observed this with a smile and increased the power of the spheres of light. This made unimaginable things of different colors approach them much faster. But the moment one of these touched the spheres of light in the hands of this woman, the entire space turned absolute black. An absolute darkness that the spheres of light in the woman's hands were not enough to even affect her. What's happening? The woman screamed in shock, seeing that she was in this darkness. Her body trembled with sheer terror, her skin was extremely pale. What is this guy? I'm a demigod, why am I so scared? The woman thought, terrified, feeling like her life was in enormous danger. Flee. Flee, 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 fleas, flee, 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 flee. You will die, you will die, you will die, you will die, you will die. Her spirituality was screaming at her, begging for her to escape. This warning was so powerful that it stunned her for a few moments, but she didn't think anymore and tried to leave the spiritual body, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape. Suddenly she felt a gaze that made her blood run cold. Slowly different worms with rings began to fall from her face. This gaze was coming from everywhere. Death, 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 death. Her spirituality was now screaming in her ear, but she couldn't do anything. More and more worms began to fall from her face and it began to lose its shape. I'm dead, she thought in complete despair, but she knew she couldn't do anything. $*# and %1. A soft and powerful voice that she didn't know if it was male or female sounded through all this darkness that made her mind explode. The woman screamed in pain as her face completely lost the human appearance it had, now becoming an amalgamation of worms writhing in pain. Before she completely lost control, she felt something touch her and she fell asleep and her body quickly returned to its human appearance. Then she was expelled from this space, returning to the body of a Dryan who was still asleep. But curiously, he seemed to be wearing an illusory, almost completely transparent black robe. With the job done, that illusory black robe disappears as if it was never there in the first place. After a few hours, Adrian opened his eyes somewhat confused, but then he jumped up with a fire spear in hand. When did I fell asleep? The redhead thought in alarm as he looked around, but the only thing he found was nothing. Before he could relax for this, the smell of blood reached his nose and, lowering his gaze, he saw how the rat from before was at his side. Adrian watched this in shock and instinctively extended his right hand to the dead rat, and a torrent of fire came out of it, completely calcining the rat. After a moment he realized what happened and stopped his attack. The only thing left of the rat was ashes. Seeing this, he just sighed as he brought his left hand to his forehead. What the fuck happened? Adrian muttered doubtfully. It's a good thing I didn't return to that dirty rat's body. A woman's voice rang in his ear, and this made Adrian turn around as he shot another torrent of fire at his back as he jumped several times to get away. Stopping and looking where he was, he saw nothing behind him and no sign of the woman who had spoken. What the fuck? Adrian muttered in shock, but suddenly heard a sigh in his ear. You can calm down. I'm not looking to hurt you, and if I wanted to, I would have already done it while you were sleeping, the woman said calmly. Adrian let out a slow breath as he used his left index finger and tapped his palm twice quickly as he looked around. Who are you and what do you want with me? The redhead asked calmly as he looked around but found no trace of the woman. Another sigh sounded in his ear and the woman spoke. Turn off your spiritual vision, you won't find me, it's just a waste of spirituality, I'm inside you. The answer surprised Adrian, and it would normally have terrified him, but now he was wearing Talk Millennium. He couldn't feel fear. Parasite? The redhead asked curiously, and the woman let out an exclamation of surprise. You know a lot, it's lucky that I decided not to kill you, said the woman while laughing amused. I'm Flora Jacob, the woman said proudly, and Adrian just opened his eyes in shock. This obviously pleased Flora, who let out another proud laugh. Yes. This is how someone should react when hearing the name of Jacob. She said proudly, but before she could continue speaking, Adrian snapped out of his shock and spoke. That's annoying, he murmured when he heard the name, and this made Flora shut her mouth. What? The woman said incredulously upon hearing Adrian's words. I said that's annoying, or did you not hear me well? Do you have a hearing problem? Adrian said with a smirk, and Flora was dumbfounded. She quickly recovered and snarled as she responded angrily. Damned brat, remember that I'm inside you and I can kill you at any moment. One wave of my hand and all your years of life will be mine, so control your tone. Adrian only snorted sharply as he tauntingly replied. Go ahead, do it, I dare you. You're crazy. Flora shouted furiously, but nothing happened to the redhead. He still felt very alive, and this made Adrian chuckle darkly. Come on, what are you waiting for? Take my years of life as you said you do. Flora said nothing and just grunted, and this made Adrian's laughter grow louder. Don't tell me you can't do it. A parasite that can't steal life has to be the biggest joke in all of history. He said, laughing hysterically. Shut up, you son of a bitch. Why don't you shut me up, or is it that you can't steal my voice either? Quote. Flora just kept quiet, and this made Adrian stop laughing and have a stunned look. Don't tell me that, the redhead said incredulously, but Flora cut him off by yelling in his head. Shut up. The shame and impotence was clear in that word, and this made Adrian laugh much harder than before. Ha 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 ha, oh fuck, seriously, you are useless. He said in complete disbelief as he held his stomach. So much laughing was hurting him. Quote. Flora just remained silent without saying anything else, letting the redhead continue laughing like crazy. Ooh shit, I haven't laughed like that in a long time, said the redhead, surprised with himself while he wiped away the tears that had fallen from his eyes while laughing. Quote. Flora just kept quiet without saying anything, and this made the redhead raise an eyebrow. I know you're still there, why don't you say anything, Flora? Did my words hurt you? He said with fake concern, but again Flora didn't say anything. Is a demigod's self-esteem that low? Are you not ashamed to act like that at your age? He asked provocatively. I'm not old. This seemed to elicit a reaction from Flora, who screamed in Adrian's ear so loud that he had to hold both of them. Shit, ma'am, you don't have to react like that, Adrian said, slightly amused, and Flora just snorted but didn't say anything else. Seeing that he hadn't elicited any further reaction from Flora, the redhead just clicked his tongue several times while shaking his head. You know it's disappointing that someone like you would get that way because of the words of a little sequence 7 inches. Again no reaction from Flora, and this made him click his tongue internally. Ads by PubFuture. It was time to start using the heavy weapons. With that kind of attitude you will never be able to find Jacob's treasure, he said with a tone full of disappointment. What do you know about the treasure? Flora asked sharply, and this made one of the corners of the redhead's mouth turn up. The fish bit the hook. You finally answers me. I thought that interaction of ours was just a trick my mind was playing on me, Adrian said, completely ignoring Flora's question, and this made the woman growl. Answer my question. The woman's tone had a barely contained rage, but all it did was raise the corners of the man's mouth. Adrian said as he shook his head. If you want to know something about the treasure, then you have to answer my questions first. Flora was silent for a few seconds, but then she gave a soft sigh. I accept, she said in a flat tone without showing much emotion. Perfect, the redhead said while clapping his hands. Well, first question, why didn't you kill me? It was my intuition that you would be useful, that's why I decided to just parasitize you, Flora said calmly, and Adrian just shook his head. Flora, no lies, I want the truth. When a parasite decides to parasitize someone, it is because they are going to kill them by stealing their lives, and very few decide to just hide inside one. We both know you're not part of the second group, he said darkly, and Flora was only silent for a few seconds before sighing. I tried but I failed, was Flora's short and simple answer, but Adrian just nodded satisfied. That could be little information, but it already told him everything he needed to know. Hunter's Hallows had to be the one to take care of that, so another of his abilities is preventing parasitism. He thought, surprised by the robe's abilities. The robe only continues to amaze him. Knowing that he couldn't keep quiet any longer, he asked his second question. Why didn't you change hosts when you failed to steal my life? Rats are not suitable for parasitizing, Flora answered curtly, and Adrian just nodded. That's obvious. If you had remained a rat for a long time, you would end up being affected by the body and hormones. Tell me, did you have the desire to mate with a male rat or a female rat? He asked, full of provocation. Fuck you, the woman replied, annoyed, and Adrian just let out a short laugh. Okay, sorry about that. So you mean as soon as we get out of the sewers you're going to parasitize someone else? The man's tone was curious and Flora's response came quickly. No. Adrian ignored the woman's simple response and simply raised an eyebrow. And that would be because. Flora just grunted and said nothing, and the redhead let out another sigh. If you want to know about the treasure, you have to answer my questions, remember? Or has age already affected your ability to remember? At the man's words, Flora only let out several sighs to calm down. Ads by PubFuture. I want to kill him, the woman thought internally, but on the outside, she only replied in a calm tone. Because I can't do it. Why can't you do it? The redhead asked quickly with a smile, and Flora just took several breaths again to calm down. Calming down, she replied, and this time her tone was full of annoyance. We are connected, so if I leave your body I will die. The woman's response surprised Adrian, who for a moment widened his eyes in surprise. Connected? What does she mean by that? He would not stay with that doubt, so he asked, showing quite a bit of curiosity. What do you mean by connected? And how deep is this connection? Flora just sighed tiredly and then explained. Right now, think of me as another organ in your body, and the blood you give me keeps me alive and functioning. The moment I separate from you, I will die because your blood no longer supports me and I cannot survive without it. Understanding what Flora was referring to, he frowned as he put a hand to his chin. Then that would also mean that if I die, you die, Adrian muttered in surprise, while Flora only remained silent for a few moments before answering. Correct. Flora confirmed, her tone one of defeat. Oh, how she had fallen. Now she's a true parasite, thought the redhead, feeling a bit strange about this. He remained silent and Flora did not speak again. After a while, in an uncomfortable silence, Adrian only sighed while speaking. I'm satisfied with what you told me, it's your turn to ask. This made Flora feel relieved, and she was somewhat anxious for the information she could get, but she had to remain calm, so hiding her desire, she asked calmly. Do you know where the treasure is? Adrian shook his head. I don't know where it is, the only thing I know about the location is that it is somewhere in Backland. At the answer, Flora sighed, disappointed. That was something she already knew. This made her believe that she had been tricked by the redhead, so she just asked a broader question. So what do you know about treasure, Jacob? Adrian only formed a soft smile on his face as he spoke in amusement. I know the treasure is actually a trap. This information froze Flora, who felt her blood run cold. That's impossible. It's a treasure that was hidden by the Jacob family for more than 1,000 years, how could it be a trap? She said, not wanting to believe the redhead's words, who only let out a dark laugh. What would you think if I told you that the Jacob family was tricked into hiding their treasure and that they were really just being part of a 1,000-year-old trap? That's impossible. Who would be capable of doing something like that? Said the woman incredulously. That someone would be someone who really likes to have a monocle over his right eye, he said, amused as Flora felt her world shatter. Monocle. The woman repeated in horror. Yes, a monocle. Your family actually knows him very well. You could say he's an old family friend, the redhead said humorously, but this didn't seem funny to Flora, who felt that everything she sacrificed had been for no reason. Her desire to return glory to her family had been in vain. Her family, that was one of the most powerful in ancient times, had been deceived to only be used as a trap. She didn't want to believe this. It was completely ridiculous. But when the redhead mentioned someone with a monocle over his right eye, she believed everything. If there was someone who could do that, it was him. The reason why her family had fallen into such a weak state. The reason the family had to live apart to avoid being consumed and replaced by him. The reason why her family had to join another family and form an organization with the sole purpose of facing him. You know, your purpose may have been in vain, but at least you're still alive, the redhead said calmly, and Flora just growled hatefully. And that doesn't matter. My family believed that with the treasure we would be able to recover our strength and defend ourselves against him. We wouldn't have to live hidden anymore. She shouted in the redhead's ear, who only sighed in exasperation. Now you can warn them of the truth. Also, so far it seems that they have survived quite well considering that a demigod appeared, he said calmly, and Flora huffed furiously. If you really know who the man with the monocle is, you know that a demigod is just an ant to him. Not even an angel is able to touch him. And you really thought a treasure would change that? Adrian cut in quickly and Flora gritted her teeth. Adrian sighed as he shook his head. No treasure will be able to protect them from him. The only thing they can do is what they have been doing for the last centuries, and that is hide, Adrian said calmly, and Flora just sighed tiredly. In my state I can't warn them, so you'll have to do it for me. And why would I do that? The redhead said with a raised eyebrow, and Flora sighed in annoyance. What do you want in exchange? You're already speaking my language, Adrian said with a smile. At the moment we can't separate, so we'll be together for a while, so first let me introduce myself. I am Adrian Kenway. It is my pleasure to meet you, ma'am, he said gracefully as he bowed, and Flora just snorted sharply. Now that we know each other, I would like to know if you are still capable of using your powers. For what purpose? Flora asked suspiciously, and the redhead sighed. To know if you'll be useful or not. I'm not going to agree to do something for someone who will only be hiding inside me without doing anything in return. At this, Flora snorted again and responded arrogantly. And what if I refuse? Then I'll go to the church to get you off me, Adrian said with a sweet tone, and Flora froze, but she quickly recovered and responded arrogantly. You are a wild Beander. You would not dare to do something like that. You would also be arrested. At Flora's words, Adrian chuckled as he nodded. You're right, that would be stupid of me, he agreed with Flora, who had a cocky smile, but Adrian continued speaking. So why don't I give you the man with the monocle? I'm sure he would appreciate it. The man's words chilled Flora. You wouldn't dare, she said in disbelief at what the man had said. Are you sure about that? I just have to say his honorific name and he will come. You want to bet how long it will take him to get here? I say 20 seconds, 5 if what I offer seems interesting to him, and I think that a member of the Jacob family who is a weakened demigod is something very interesting, he said darkly, and Flora paled. He will consume you too. Are you seriously willing to take such a big risk? You can't be that crazy. Flora screamed in complete disbelief. She couldn't believe what was happening. Try me, Adrian said full of provocation as he brought his hands together and interlocked his fingers. He leaned his head against his hand and closed his eyes. Flora looked at this terrified, but after a few moments she calmed down as she let out an awkward laugh. It is impossible for you to know his honorific name. No one who has known it lived to tell about it. You are bluffing, Flora said arrogantly, but in her voice there was still a trace of fear. Adrian said nothing, just let out a dark laugh that filled Flora with terror. Impossible, she thought, stupefied, but before she could say anything, Adrian spoke. The clock hand that tampers with time, he said in ancient Hermes, and Flora felt that her life was over. The shadow that roams ACR. Stop, I will talk, but please stop. Flora screamed with all her might, and Adrian giggled as he opened his red eyes that were full of mischief. Was it so difficult to cooperate? He asked, and Flora from inside Adrian looked at him fearfully. You are completely crazy. The man just let out a soft laugh as he parted his hands. Ads by PubFuture. And that's why it's better that you tell me what I want, or else this time I will finish the sentence. There was a subtle threat in the man's tone that Flora easily detected, and this caused her to let out a shaky breath. I can use some of my abilities up to sequence 5, but my condition is very bad and I can't use any of my demigod abilities, she replied uncomfortably, and the redhead just nodded. At least you're not as useless as I thought. What are the abilities you can use, and do they have any limits? Adrian asked curiously as he leaned against the sewer wall, and Flora let out a slow breath to calm herself to avoid saying something bad. The last thing she wanted was to piss off this crazy son of a bitch. I can use decryption, which allows me to see the truth behind anything related to mysticism through data scraps. I can also steal the powers of other Beyonders, and thanks to our current connection I can make you use them for a maximum of 15 minutes. The limit is that it will depend on your understanding and mind to steal the power you want, otherwise it will depend on luck. But I can only do it 2 times. I can also influence people through dreams, but I'm not able to enter at will. Maybe when my condition improves that will change, explained Flora deeply. She had never felt so humiliated. That someone who was only sequence 7 put her in this situation caused her an enormous shame. Adrian, upon hearing the abilities that Flora could use, he couldn't help but whistle in surprise. That will be very useful if we can get your condition to improve, then you can use more abilities, right? he asked with a small smile. Yes, but that will take a long time, confirmed Flora. Now it's your turn to fulfill your part of the deal, warn my family, Flora said seriously, and Adrian only smiled sharply. Oh no miss, that was before, as you forced me to blackmail you. The deal changed, now I want something more. You've got to be fucking with me, what more do you want? Flora yelled, this time furious. Calm down, this time it's something small, nothing exaggerated, I know when to stop, he said, and Flora exhaled hard through her nose to calm down. Well, what do you want this time? I want to be able to join your organization, Adrian said as if he was talking about the weather, and Flora was taken aback for a few moments before growling. Why? She knew she couldn't refuse, but she needed to know that she wouldn't be putting her family at risk by accepting this madman. If that was the case, she would rather die. Simply to have one more channel. This way it will be easier for me to find the ingredients I need and maybe some other artifact, he said nonchalantly. Flora was silent for a few moments and thought about what Adrian was asking for. After being silent for a long time in which Adrian didn't say anything, she finally spoke through her teeth. Deal, but you better warn my family. I keep my deals, ma'am, Adrian replied, still with a smile on his face. Our organization is called Hermits of Fate and it was formed recently, more specifically at the beginning of the 5th epoch. It was formed with the union of the Jacob and Zoroast families. The purpose of this organization is to defend ourselves from him, Flora explained with annoyance, and the redhead just nodded. You should know that you can't trust any member of this organization. They only care about themselves and they won't hesitate to betray you if they can gain something in return. The woman's tone turned serious and Adrian chuckled. I know that, ma'am. After all, the members of Hermits of Fate are almost entirely beyonders of the Marauder path. All the beyonders on that path are treacherous, liars, swindlers, tricksters, and they don't care about anything but their own lives. They would even give up everything if it would ensure their survival. Adrian's tone was calm and there was no hint of provocation in this, but Flora still felt offended. Not wanting this guy to talk any further, she returned to the main topic of the conversation. The only way to attend the meetings is through an admission ticket that will have our brand and also the place, date and time of the meeting. Without this it is impossible to enter. It is also the only way to notify my family. So how do I get that ticket? I hope it wasn't in the rat, because then it's just ash now, the redhead asked curiously as he looked at the mark he had left on the ground where he had burned the poor animal. Flora just let out an exasperated sigh. I'm not stupid enough to carry it in such an annoying body. I hid it a little deeper in the sewer. I'll guide you. Guide me around your house, ma'am, Adrian said calmly, but he had a small smile on his face. Flora growled in response as she gave the directions with her voice filled with annoyance. At the bottom, turn right. ... After following Flora's directions for a while, Adrian came to a cracked wall and he looked down with a raised eyebrow. In the lower part of this wall there was a hole smaller than his clenched fist, similar to the classic holes in the cartoons where the rats lived. ... He didn't say anything but just looked at the hole with a flat face. This is sad, Adrian thought in disappointment. For a demigod to stoop so low is a complete shame. Did he feel bad for the woman? Not in the slightest. She had tried to kill him. Why should he feel bad for her? So he preferred to do something that was quickly becoming his favorite hobby. So, you live there? Asked the redhead, amused while scratching his neck. I was a rat, Flora said, embarrassed, but quickly recovered and gnashed her teeth angrily as she yelled in the redhead's ear. Just stick your hand in and pull out the ticket. At Flora's embarrassed outburst, Adrian laughed out loud. Yes, I'm coming, the man said between laughs as he squatted down and stuck his hand into the hole. Ads by PubFuture. Your rat children won't be in here, right? The last thing I want is to hurt them, he said, full of provocation. Flora took a shaky breath. She was so close to exploding. Feeling something cold and metallic on his fingertips, Adrian frowned and grabbed the object with his fingers, unable to make a fist due to the size of the hole, and pulled it out. Thanks to the fact that he could see in the dark, he saw that between his fingers was a coin made of what appeared to be silver. Holding the coin between his index and ring fingers, he saw that it had two sides. On one side was a complicated symbol of fate and concealment. On the other he had a series of different numbers and words in different languages, and some words that he recognized were in Hermes, Elvish and Ancient Hermes. This is the ticket? Asked the slightly impressed redhead as he looked at the coin. It was slightly larger than a normal penny. Flora hummed a yes. That symbol on the front of the coin is the symbol of the Hermits of Fate, and what you see on the back is a code that we created so that only members could decipher it, Flora explained, and Adrian could hear the pride in the woman's voice. Decipher, huh? Quite fitting. After all, it is one of the abilities of the Beyonders of the Marauder pathway. The redhead thought curiously, but then he spoke. So tell me, if what it says now is about the next meeting, how will we know when the next one is? The man asked doubtfully, and Flora giggled arrogantly. Don't worry about that. That coin, even if it doesn't seem like it, was made with rituals and was designed so that every time there is a new meeting, the information behind it will change. Adrian whistled in impression as he nodded, but he realized a problem, so he asked another question with a raised eyebrow. Pretty useful, but tell me, will the coin ever run out of spirituality since it was created with rituals? Don't worry about that either. When we're in a meeting, you'll understand how it works. We don't organize many meetings, so at most you will have one meeting every month, so you better make sure you know what you want, Flora explained, and Adrian clucked in annoyance. One every month? What will happen when I need an ingredient for my promotion? Will I have to wait that month to get it? And what if they couldn't get it? It will be a waste of time. Adrian thought, quite annoyed by that, but he also felt even more grateful for having joined the Tarot Club so soon. An organization like the Tarot Club was extremely rare, in the sense that the meetings were so frequent. In any other organization, the normal thing will always be once or twice a month. So when will the next meeting be? It will be on the 30th of August in a warehouse on Backland Bridge at 4:45 p.m., Flora said unhurriedly. Adrian had to bite his tongue to avoid cursing. August 30th. That's in 38 days. The man thought, annoyed as he sighed in exasperation. He had already been told how long each would take, but he couldn't help but be disappointed that this one was so far away. Knowing that he couldn't do anything about it, he just sighed again to calm himself down before pulling the burned band out of his pocket. Tell me, Flora, if I use a Beyonder artifact, will you who are inside me also suffer the negative effect? Ads by PubFuture. Flora did not expect this question, but her response was almost immediate. Our connection may be deep, but we are still two different entities. That means that the negative effects will only affect you, Flora explained. She looked curiously at the object in Adrian's hands. So if I use this, you won't lose control? Asked the redhead as he wrapped the burned band around his left arm. The ravings of the true creator began to ring in his ears. Wait, what? Flora asked, confused, not understanding what the man was referring to. Adrian just smiled and executed a shadow leap up to 15 meters. Stepping out of the shadows, he asked aloud, "Are you okay?" "Why wouldn't I be, idiot?" Flora asked, somewhat annoyed. She doesn't understand why Adrian decided to use an artifact now. "For nothing, just curious," he said calmly as he removed the burned band from his arm. Confirmed. Flora is safe when I use a shadow leap, but it could be because she's inside me and I'm protecting her. I still don't know what will happen if I use it while carrying another person, he thought seriously as he put the burnt band in his pocket. I'll have to try that soon. With the experiment complete and another one for the future, Adrian pulled out Hangover Time and opened it. Seeing that it marked 3, he couldn't help but sigh as he sat down. He was planning to rest a bit more when suddenly he heard Flora sigh tiredly, and this made him sit up straight. What's wrong, Flora? Are you tired of being inside me? Is not that, you idiot, it's just that my stupid student will be here in a few minutes and I'd rather we get out of here than have to deal with her, the woman said tiredly, and Adrian just put his hand to his head while sighing. Don't tell me it's Hazel. How long will it take her to get here? Adrian asked emotionlessly. In about 15 minutes, enough time to get out of here. Adrian just nodded, but a sharp smile appeared on his face. Flora, can I talk to you in my mind? Flora narrowed her eyes suspiciously but still answered. Normally we could, but in my current condition it's impossible. The most I can do is speak to your mind like now, but if you want to tell me something you'll have to speak out loud. So you can't read my mind? He asked sharply. Flora just grunted yes. Adrian's smile sharpened. Then I hope you don't mind me having a chat with your student, he said confidently. It's time to add a new member to the team. Oh no, Flora thought in alarm. Adrian heard distant footsteps getting closer and only smiled slightly. It was show time. That was too easy. The powers of a Beyonder are incredible, thought the hooded figure of a woman who moved quickly through the sewers with a huge smile. This woman appeared to be dressed in women's black hunting clothes, and the hood of her jacket was pulled up to hide her hair. Making a turn, she stopped her run and began to walk towards a cracked wall while pulling down her hood, revealing her wavy green-black hair and bright brown eyes. This revealed that she was a young lady and she had an aura of superiority around her. Approaching the hole that was no bigger than her clenched fist, she quickly smoothed her hair before gracefully bending and tapping gently over the hole, as if she were knocking on a door. "Teacher, I'm here for my Beyonders class," the young woman said excitedly and waited patiently. But after a few seconds she frowned. "Teacher, excuse me, are you there?" she asked, somewhat confused as she tapped softly above the hole again. Again there was no answer, and this made her frown anxiously. "Teacher, are you there? Look, I did what you asked me to and I stole all this just as you told me," the girl said anxiously as she took several things from her pockets. These varied between precious rings, fat wallets, makeup, gemstone-encrusted necklaces, etc. But again there was no response from the hole, and this made the young woman pale. Putting the things aside, she crouched down and poked her eyes into the hole. "Please excuse my manners," the green-haired girl said as she tried to see better in the hole. She squinted to try to see better, but it was too dark and she couldn't see well in the dark. So focused was she on that she didn't notice how a figure was approaching with silent steps towards her from behind. Standing to the side of the woman, the figure raised a red eyebrow in amusement and a small smile formed on his face. Slightly bending over, the figure spoke into the girl's ear. "If you're looking for Flora, she's busy right now," the male voice said, amused, and the girl's pupils shrank. Ads by PubFuture. Out of reflex she quickly moved her hand to her arm and pulled out a medium knife and tried to stab the man who had spoken. This had been extremely fast, but the man still dodged it with extreme ease as he only moved his head to the side and the girl's attack passed by. "So close. Better luck next time," the man said quickly, and anger began to build rapidly inside the green-haired woman. She was in a very disadvantageous position, so to try to improve that she tried to kick the man's knee to unbalance him, but he raised his leg again and blocked her attack. "Are you really her student? What a disappointment," the man said sadly, and the young woman growled angrily. "Shut up," the girl yelled furiously as she gave a roundhouse kick that the man dodged again, backing up, but this gave the young woman enough space to stand up and get a better look at the man. He was a rather tall young man with a handsome face, muscular body and a prominent chest. With red hair and eyes, he also had a provocative smile that made her see red. She didn't even think about it and pulled another knife from her belt, and now with a knife in both hands she charged at the redhead. He just jumped to the side, avoiding the right thrust of the green-haired woman, who tried to deliver a high kick to the man's face, but he only moved his head to the side as he kicked her supporting leg. The green-haired girl's leg slipped and she fell hard to the ground, grunting in pain. She covered herself, waiting for a blow that never came, and just looked surprised at the man, who looked at her with pity. "Did you lose your mind so quickly? That's sad. Flora really failed as a teacher," the man said with enormous disappointment while shaking his head. This only made the young woman more angry. "Shut up," she yelled furiously as she threw one of the knives at the redhead, who dodged it again. "Uff, what a pity you failed. Now you only have one knife, so tell me, what will you do now?" the man asked, amused, and the green-haired woman yelled furiously as she got up again and rushed at the redhead. This time she lunged towards the face of the redhead, who looked at this with an emotionless face. Ducking, he let the thrust pass, and before the woman could react he gave her a strong blow to the stomach that made her drop the knife at the same time that she fell to her knees while vomiting. The man just looked at this with serious eyes before sighing while shaking his head. "It's obvious that you've never used a knife and you've never fought anyone. Your guard is practically non-existent," the man said calmly, and the green-haired woman only growled hatefully as she looked up. She was holding her stomach and there was a trace of vomit on her jaw. The redhead looked at this with pity and took a handkerchief from his pocket. "Take this and wipe your face, you look horrible," the redhead said unhurriedly as he threw the handkerchief at the young woman's face. She removed the handkerchief from her face and tossed it aside. "I'm going to kill you, bastard," the woman yelled with pure hatred, getting up trembling, but when she took a step forward her legs gave out and she fell back to the ground. The man looked at this calmly and sighed as he approached the girl. "A good blow to the stomach will leave you with your legs shaking for a long time. First sit down and rest. In a while you will be able to walk well," he said as he grabbed the girl's arm and sat her down. "Do not touch me," the young woman said furiously and removed her arm from the man's grip. Seeing the young woman's reaction, the redhead just sighed again and squatted down and calmly looked into the young woman's hate-filled brown eyes. You know that if I had wanted now you would be dead, right? He said in an emotionless tone, and the young woman gave him a look, but unable to keep it, she lowered her gaze to the ground. Seeing this, the redhead nodded this time. Well, that's the first step to recognize the truth. Now can you tell me where you went wrong to end up like this? He asked while pointing at her, and the hatred in the woman's eyes was disappearing, being replaced by confusion. Using the sleeve of her jacket to wipe her mouth, she was silent for a few moments before answering hesitantly. I completely underestimated your strength. I didn't have my guard up and let your words get to my head, is that correct? Hearing the answer, the redhead smiled with some surprise and gave a little applause. Not bad, that's correct. Now that you know what you did wrong, we can improve from there. I'll give you a few more minutes to rest and we'll continue, he said with some pride as he got up. Wait, who are you supposed to be? The greenhead asked quickly, and this made the redhead smile and he turned around. Isn't it obvious? I'm your new teacher in the Beyonder world, he said, bowing slightly, and the woman widened her eyes in surprise. Wait, teacher. But then what happened to teacher Flora? She asked incredulously, and the redhead let out a soft laugh. Flora had to return to the family to recover. You should know that living like a rat is a very bad idea, you will understand it in the future. But don't worry, as I told you, she left me in charge of your teaching, the man explained calmly, and the green-haired woman just nodded surprised. We had to transfer her quickly, so the most she could tell me is the meeting point she had with you, so I don't know your name. The green-haired girl was still surprised, but the man's question made her nod weakly. I'm Hazel Matched. The young woman introduced herself, somewhat uncomfortable. The redhead nodded with a small smile as he extended his hand towards her. I'm sure you've heard of me. I'm James Holmes, and from now on I'll be your new teacher, the man introduced himself, and the woman widened her eyes in surprise. I would prefer you call me Teacher Holmes, the man said with a sharp smile. Holmes? Like Mr. Holmes, the fire mage of East Borough? Hazel thought as she stared in shock at the man's outstretched hand. She had read all about what he did. He alone destroyed and burned a gang in less than a day. A man with power. A power that she desired. And that man would be her new teacher. It's too good to be true. And this caused her to narrow her eyes in suspicion at the man in front of her. How do I know you're telling the truth? Mr. Holmes is supposed to be someone who always wears a creepy mask on his face, why aren't you wearing it? At the question, Adrian gave a short laugh as he nodded and withdrew his hand. That's when I'm outside doing my job, but since now we'll be teacher and student, it's a principle that you know what my face is like, the redhead explained calmly, and Hazel nodded, still suspicious. It seems that she still didn't believe him. And this, instead of discouraging Adrian, only made his smile grow. That's it, distrust everything I tell you. You don't even know me, so you shouldn't trust a single word that comes out of my mouth. Adrian thought with satisfaction to Hazel. This is the kind of attitude a Beyonder has to have if they want to survive. But you're still very green, so you're easy to fool. He thought darkly as he smiled sweetly. If you want another form of confirmation, I can just do this, he said as he held out his hand again. Hazel looked at this with suspicion that immediately turned to surprise when she saw that a flame appeared floating in the middle of the man's palm. Before she could think it was a trick, this flame took the form of a raven and spread its wings and began to fly around her. He's the real one. He really can control fire. Hazel thought excitedly as she watched with a smile as the raven flew around her. The raven, after circling the green-haired girl, suddenly flew over her and exploded in a spectacle of sparks. After that, the sewer returned to darkness, but this did not last long because Adrian generated several fireballs that remained floating around them. Hazel had a huge smile on her face while seeing all of this. You are the real Mr. Holmes, she said with extreme emotion, to which Adrian laughed. Remember that from now on I am Teacher Holmes to you, he said calmly, and Hazel just nodded energetically. But Adrian still hadn't finished speaking. Ads by PubFuture. I didn't think my name had already made it to the nobles, if I'm being honest. That surprises me a bit, he said with slight surprise, and Hazel nodded. Mr. Teacher Holmes, your name is repeated a lot in circles. You must know that you have given life to conversations that normally put me to sleep, Hazel replied with a smile before freezing. How did he know that she was a noble? Seeing Hazel's paling skin, Adrian let out a short laugh while covering his mouth with his right hand. His look was one of amusement. Do you really think that I wouldn't know who Hazel Matched is? You are the only daughter of Mr. Maury Matched. It would be ridiculous if I didn't know who you are, having such a man as a father, the redhead said, full of amusement, and Hazel just nodded, somewhat uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed for her previous reaction. That was something she should have seen coming. Sorry about that, Teacher Holmes, it just surprised me, that's all. Don't worry about that. When you have more experience in this world, this will be something that will be very easy for you, the redhead explained calmly. After all, Sequence 7 of your path is literally called Cryptologist. Discovering and collecting information with just little pieces will be a piece of bread for you, the redhead thought with satisfaction as he looked at Hazel. Feeling that enough time had passed, he warned the green-haired girl. You should be able to stand up by now, personal advice, get up slowly. Nodding to her new teacher's words, Hazel slowly got up, her legs still shaky but much less than before. Seeing the legs of the green-haired woman, Adrian clicked his tongue internally. My blow may have been a bit strong for her. Hazel tried to straighten her legs, but this was a bad idea and she almost fell over if it weren't for Adrian grabbing her arm and stopping her. Keep your knees bent, it will be easier to walk. Hazel just nodded and did as the redhead said, this time if she could stay upright. Nodding to that, Adrian let go of the green-haired woman's arm. I need you to tell me what Flora taught you. The exchange was very fast, so she didn't have time to tell me everything about your classes. Hazel nodded as she took several breaths and put a hand to her belly while grunting. She was sure it would leave a bruise in the morning. She taught me about the acting method along with information about my path. Adrian just nodded while raising an eyebrow. Would it be possible to know what exactly she told you about the first thing? Asked the redhead. When she told me about the potion I was going to take, she also told me about the psych remnants it possessed. She told me that with the acting method I would be able to trick this psyche into accommodating it faster, Hazel explained, and Adrian only frowned slightly. This was done so that Hazel would notice, and it worked perfectly. Hazel saw her teacher's frown and got worried. Excuse me, Teacher Holmes, did I say something wrong? I thought I had it all memorized, Hazel said worriedly, and the redhead shook his head while holding the corners of his mouth down. She fell right into his trap. What you said in itself is fine, but it seems that Flora forgot to tell you some important details. I'm honestly not surprised, after all she's already a bit older and her memory fails her, the redhead said with a small smile while listening to the woman before mentioned screaming in his ear. I'm not old, son of a bitch, Flora shouted furiously, but Adrian just ignored her as he had been doing all this time. All potions have a psyche remnant that comes from the materials used to make it. It would take years to accommodate the potions, but this is solved using the acting method. This was another experiment that he was going to check. When he signed the contract to hide the acting method, he didn't know how far he could go. Now would be the time to check it out. And seeing that he didn't receive any punishment for saying acting method, he saw this as a green to continue. First, you have to know that it's not accommodating, it's digesting. By using the acting method, we trick the remaining psyche so that the potion merge more with us. When he said this last thing, he felt like something was squeezing him. This made him stop his explanation for a few moments until that feeling went away. So that's the limit, huh? Thought the redhead as he let out a sigh. But the most important thing you have to remember is that, again he felt squeezed, and this time it was a little weaker, but this was enough of an experiment for him. He didn't want to test his soul's resistance again, so he better stop now before something happens that he can't control. Hazel listened carefully to the man's words, but she frowned slightly in doubt. Why the emphasis on? The green-haired asked doubtfully. Adrian gave a light sigh and gave a good explanation. This is not something that is explicit in the contract, so he could explain this calmly. It's because you run the great risk of getting carried away and you'll end up losing yourself in the performance to the point that the chances of losing control are enormous. Hazel paled for a moment as she nodded. When she was under Flora, she had told her what it meant to lose control, and that was a future that she did not want for herself, so she understood something of the gravity of what her new teacher said. How is it possible that Teacher Flora forgot this important detail? Has age really affected her memory? Hazel asked incredulously, and Adrian had to bite his tongue to keep from bursting out laughing. But inside him, there was someone who didn't find it funny at all. Ungrateful girl, after everything I've done for you, and that's how you treat me, Flora shouted furiously, and this made Adrian unable to contain himself anymore, and he let out a loud laugh that made Hazel look at him confused, and Flora became even more furious. It only took a few moments for Adrian to stop laughing, but he still had a smile on his face. You shouldn't blame Flora so much, she is still your teacher even though you are now in my charge. What do you think she would say if she knew what you just said? At the redhead's words, Hazel nodded, showing that she understood. Sorry for that, Teacher Holmes. Adrian shook his head as he waved his hand down. No problem after all, what she doesn't know can't hurt her. When he said that, the smile on his face grew a bit and Hazel couldn't help but smile back. Flora inside Adrian simply fell silent, but he could still hear her growling under her breath. Deciding that bothering the woman was enough, he changed the subject. Hazel, since this is our first class, it would be a good idea to finish it early. We just met and you still haven't fully recovered from the blow I gave you. So soon? The green-haired thought while frowning. She hoped the class would be longer, but she also knew she couldn't force the man in front of her to change his mind. She still felt the hit in her stomach after all. So with no other choice, she just sighed and nodded. Okay, Teacher Holmes, so what will your class system be like? Teacher Flora taught me and checked my progress every Monday and Saturday at 3:15 a.m. As soon as Hazel said the time, Adrian cursed in his mind. 3 a.m. Didn't that rat have anything better to do than use that disgusting hour? Adrian thought, annoyed, but outside he just nodded. For now we'll keep that schedule and we'll see in the following days how we'll change it. I'm sure it's annoying for you to wake up at this time because it is for me, the redhead said with an awkward laugh, and Hazel just nodded in complete agreement. Beneath her brown eyes were faint dark circles. Perfect, then I'll see you here Saturday at 3:15 a.m. Have a good night, my student, Adrian said with a soft smile, and Hazel bowed slightly. You too, Teacher Holmes, see you soon. With that said, Hazel straightened up but kept her knees bent and turned around, slowly walking away from Adrian while still having a hand on her stomach. Adrian watched this without saying anything until he heard Hazel's footsteps had moved far enough away, and only then did he let out a sigh that he had been holding for a long time. Well, that was easier than I thought, he murmured, surprised at himself. Pyromaniac's Sequence 7 gaslighting ability is incredible. I can imagine what a conspirator would be capable of. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian, tell me something. Why did you decide to take Hazel as a student? You don't get any profit from it, nor is she of much use, so why? Asked Flora curiously after finally calming down enough. I thought you'd be more upset that I stole your student, but you don't seem to care in the least. That's kind of disappointing, Adrian said, shaking his head, and Flora snorted. She was just an attempt to cultivate someone to parasitize and use their characteristics to recover, but you arrived and that plan went to hell. I don't care in the slightest what you do with her, but her presence is annoying to me, Flora said coldly. Were you planning to fatten her up to eat her later? That sounds familiar to me, from a story my mother told me about a witch with 2 children, Adrian said, amused, and Flora just snorted. You know, forget about it, do what you want with her. I was just curious about this move of yours, Flora responded, annoyed, and then fell silent. Adrian didn't continue to bother her, but he just stared at the path where Hazel left. His red eyes were now cold and calculating. Originally he hadn't planned to take Hazel under his wing, but after thinking about it for a few moments he realized the huge gains he could have. First, thanks to Flora, he already had practically all the formulas of the Marauder's path up to Sequence 4, he just had to convince her to tell him, and this meant that he was missing one less person for his Sequence 4 ritual. And the second thing was Hazel's parents and their noble status. Hazel's parents were Maury Matched and Rihanna, but the most important person was her father. Maury Matched is a member of Parliament for the Kingdom's House of Commons and a member of the New Party. That was a much heavier name than Dutch Wilson, and one he wanted to get his hands on. If he achieved that, he had several plans that would become possible with the help of that man. But he wasn't planning to do anything about it yet. There were too many risks in making a move so early, and it was better to wait. He would only have the confidence to do all of that when he advanced to conspirator and had the ability to manipulate people better. With all these thoughts and plans running through his mind, Adrian kept his gaze the way Hazel went and let out a dark laugh. Oh, little Hazel, don't you know that free things are the most expensive things? Everything that fate gives has a price that must be paid, but don't worry, I'll make sure to charge well. With those words said, the fireballs that floated around him vanished and only Adrian's scarlet eyes remained in the darkness of the sewer. Flora heard all this but did not care. What happened to that girl was no longer her problem. Knowing that he had nowhere to go now, he just sighed as he pulled out a few melted red candles from his jacket along with some damaged red poppies. Seeing the state of the flowers and candles, he only lamented internally for these, but he was also grateful that he always carried some with him. Ads by PubFuture. Placing the flowers and candles in their respective places, he took a piece of paper from his pocket and looked at it carefully. Seeing that the symbol was fine and did not show any damage, he nodded and placed it in its place. Flora looked at what Adrian was doing curiously. Adrian, what are you supposed to be doing? Is this a ritual of some kind? It was the first time she had seen someone place materials in such a strange way. Also that symbol. It's the first time I've seen it, the woman thought doubtfully, but Adrian didn't answer but knelt and looked at the candle in front of him with a serious look. He had several changes of clothes and all his money in the City of Calamities and he had to get them out at some point and now he thinks it's the best time. The reason why he still hadn't done the ritual to get them out of the Sephiroth is because he now had a spectator by the name of Flora. I can't use the original prayer, it's almost certainly the honorific name of the god who brought me here and I can't reveal it to anyone. I've been planning to change it for a while now but I never got around to trying the new name, the redhead thought seriously as he extended his hand and a small fireball formed in it. This ball of fire left his hand and slowly lit the candles and he watched this with a determined look. I'm almost sure that the name I created is safe and nothing bad will happen, but nothing is safe in this world. There is still a great risk that it will end up attracting the attention of an unwanted existence and everything will go to hell, he thought as he raised his hands and interlacing his fingers, he supported his forehead on top of it. But now I can't doubt. His red eyes shone with determination and Adrian closed his eyes and opened his mouth and spoke in ancient Hermes. The scarlet monarch that burns depravity. You are the calamity of the old days. You are the closest to the oldest one. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to take this offering. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. What the fuck have you done? Flora screamed in extreme terror when she saw what Adrian had done. The lunatic had said the honorific name of a great existence. And a name of 3 lines. That is something that only connects to a god. But Adrian didn't pay attention to what Flora shouted. The whispers that reached his ears were something much more important to him. Hearing the whispers in his ears caused a wide smile to form on Adrian's face, but this only served to make Flora more terrified. Why are you smiling, you son of a bitch? You just said the honorific name of a god. We are dead. Flora screamed and Adrian said nothing, he just began to draw a sphere of light in his mind. Opening his eyes he found himself in the already familiar city covered in yellowish smoke. The smile on Adrian's face was huge and he even let out a hysterical laugh. It worked. It really worked. The pride in the redhead's tone was notorious. How he decided to change the honorific name was as follows. He decided to keep the first line but change it slightly. From he changed it to. I originally wanted it to be instead of, but that name is already in the honorific name of the 3 flavor soup, so it better be the other one. I don't want to pray to him by accident, the redhead muttered uncomfortably. A small problem appeared when it was time to change the second line. From to. Although they have no apparent relationship with each other, the new line points to the control he has over the City of Calamities. That is something that only he has and no one else. It was also the safest line of the 3. And finally the third and last line remained the same. It was a slight change but it kept the whole essence and that was enough for him. With all that done, now I better do what I came to do before Flora dies of a heart attack because I'm not responding, the redhead said calmly as he extended his hand towards a small flame floating next to him. This is undoubtedly the second moment that she felt more terror in her 200 years of life. Being only second to that moment she had in the spirit body of the bastard she was now tied to. This bastard was crazy and said the honorific name of an existence that was possibly a god. I saved myself from a space of darkness only to die for this idiot. My luck can't be that horrible, she thought, horrified, seeing that Adrian didn't respond. Before she could yell at the man again, she watched as the symbol on the paper in front of him glowed for a few moments. Suddenly a gate of flames formed in front of him and behind it was a majestic city covered in yellowish smoke. She could also see what appeared to be soldiers made of fire dressed in rusty red armor, and she could also see that there was a figure in front of these soldiers. Knowing what that could mean, she quickly closed her eyes and senses. Do not look directly at God. She was shaking hard and couldn't believe she was still alive again. It must be a merciful existence to forgive such an offense. But this guy really prayed to a god and he answered. Is this idiot a blessed one? Flora thought more and more in horror as reality hit her head. I tried to parasitize the blessed of a god. She thought desperately, and this time as she could inside Adrian she kneeled in front of the door without looking up or opening her eyes. Please, great existence, I beg your forgiveness. I didn't know that the man named Adrian Kenway was your blessed. If I had known, I would never have tried to hurt him. I beg you, forgive me for this offense. The death that a god was capable of causing was the worst thing one would have the misfortune to suffer. Not even what she went through before could compare one bit to what a god could do. Death would be a blessing that she would not have the pleasure of having. Much less a quick one. After the longest seconds of her life, nothing happened to her, nor did she suffer a divine punishment, but she did not dare to look up. After a few moments, she heard how the door of flames seemed to close and felt how Adrian moved. So with a trembling voice, she asked, Adrian, is that still you? In writings left behind by her family ancestor, he wrote how it was not uncommon for evil gods to use people who spoke their honorific names to use this connection to infect them. She couldn't know if Adrian was still Adrian, so she had better find out as soon as possible. At the question, Adrian let out a short provocative laugh while shaking his head in amusement. Why wouldn't I be Flora? Don't tell me you care about me. Adrian's words made Flora breathe a sigh of relief, but then she snarled angrily. You're crazy imbecile, you said the honorific name of a god and he answered what we are supposed to do now. Hearing Flora's words, Adrian raised an eyebrow while smiling slightly. My lord is just and merciful. He saved me and I owe him everything, he explained calmly, and Flora had a ridiculous expression on her face. Save? The question slipped out of her mouth and the redhead nodded. Ads by PubFuture. Yes, save. I received his divine help at my lowest moment, and since then I have served him faithfully. Adrian's tone was that of a faithful believer, and Flora was alarmed. Has this idiot already been infected? Was this her future? Adrian just got up and picked up a change of clothes that were on the floor along with a thick wad of bills. Without shame, he took off all his clothes, remaining only in his underwear before Flora's flat gaze. The woman didn't say anything and just watched how the redhead got dressed without saying anything, although her eyes were drawn by something. They're quite big, thought the woman, slightly impressed, seeing Adrian's large pectorals, and this also made her gaze be drawn to his big nipples. Pink. Adrian, unaware of Flora's perverted thoughts, buttoned the last button of his shirt and then put on a new leather jacket. Did you enjoy the show? The redhead asked coquettishly as he filled the pockets of his new jacket with the things that survived. Flora just snorted as she looked away. Seeing that the woman fell silent, Adrian gave a soft laugh as he tucked the metal bottle into a back pocket. You don't have to worry about my lord. He won't hurt you because now you have a debt to pay for the crime you committed, Adrian said when he finished laughing, and this made Flora frown worriedly. What kind of debt do I have to pay? My lord believes that each one should be punished according to the crime they committed, and since you tried to take my life, your debt will be to serve me for 15 years, explained Adrian with a smile, and Flora blanched. 15 years? Asked Flora, surprised, not believing what she had heard. Adrian nodded and spoke again. Normally the punishment for trying to take the life of another would be death, but my lord is a merciful god and understands the situation you were in. That's why your punishment will be 15 years of serving me with your abilities and intelligence, Adrian explained without haste. Listening to the death part, Flora's skin stood on end, but then she calmed down. Thinking more coldly of her punishment, she saw that it was acceptable and even less harsh than she expected. Serve this idiot for 15 years? If I can barely take it now and only know him for 3 hours, won't I end up dying for something else? Flora thought, annoyed for a few moments before giving a defeated sigh. This is better than dying, so the faster I accept this, the easier these 15 years will be for me. With the decision made, the worm woman spoke. It seems like a fair punishment, so tell me, my lord Adrian, what do I have to do? She asked in a calm voice, and Adrian laughed. First, forget about treating me with respect, Flora. I really like how we treated each other before, so stop licking my balls, will you? He said provocatively, and Flora growled. Fuck you, bastard, the woman insulted with venom, and the redhead nodded. Good girl, the man said with a sharp smile. Pretending that you have someone strong behind you is the best.